in the morning. You got me up all cause you need to talk. To 4 in the evening. Wanna break up, say that you've had enough. I'm tired of talking, again and again. Argue about everything. You are my darling. This kiss and make up, I know you wanna touch. You call me every night, call me every day. I just wanna get you alone now. Trust me when I say, we gon' be okay. We just gotta boom, bada boom, ba. I don't wanna fight, you know that I'm right. Baby, let me talk to your body. We gon' be okay, hear me when I say.
Nostalgia is often that happy place that takes us back to a time when things were a semblance of normalcy. But it appears in modern times that many men are in a state of consternation because they feel that the modern woman does not meet the qualifications that are vital for a wife. When you think about the icons of promiscuity, you think about women like Madonna, an icon from the 80s that is now iconoclast in the minds of many men. And more so recently in modern times, you have women like Cardi B that more or less personify the same virtues that Madonna more or less pontificated back in the past. But the problem with these type of women is that there's a 30% of men that are actually virgins, and these men are actually looking for women. But the question that I want to challenge you is that, are there women that have what's called undiagnosed sexual addictions that's reducing their ability to be wives for these future men in the future? Could it be that promiscuity and undiagnosed sexual addictions have been the death kill for many men and women as it relates to having close, intact relationships and families? Could it be that because of rampant promiscuity and undiagnosed addictions that divorce rates are more or less on the rise as many are initiated by women? Could it be that the men that have waited for their wives will never get the women that they want because these women are not the icons of women of the past? Women of the past were women like Dorothy Dandridge and some of the other women that you'll see, black women and white women that were more or less icons of virtue. But the icons of virtue, chasteness, and also shamefulness has gone away as the women of modern times, regardless of their ethnic hue, have succumbed to things that are more or less not beneficial for their soul, body, and spirit, but also for the ego integrity of a man, as men need to feel like they're respected and they can value the woman that they are dealing with. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this show as I bring it to you live from the greatest state in the union, the Tar Heel State. And I need you guys to remember this, as there are 7 steps to male optimization. If it ain't 7, it ain't kosher. If it ain't kosher, it ain't right. Is sexual promiscuity reducing women's ability to be wife ready? You decide. Who told you that you couldn't rise from the morass of your current situation? Who told you that you had to be a slave to the pain of your past? Who told you that you had to settle for mediocrity in this current culture called America? Who told you that you couldn't change your mind? Talk to me. Now's the time for empowerment. And I'm not the Reverend Knight. I'm the Kosher Clinician.
addicted to you. All of my attention I've been giving to you. Caught up in my feelings, I got feelings for you. Caught up in my feelings, I got feelings for you. On my mind, I can't lie. On my mind, I can't lie. Pull you down till you dry. Pull you down till you dry. All the time, ease my mind. All the time, ease my mind. I know that you're dangerous, I'm addicted to you. I might rent the Lambo and go drive it like it's stolen. I've been living wild, I'm just going through the motions. Stumbling out the Uber, grab my hand, gave me a notion. Swimming in your water, but it feels just like the ocean. I can't lie, I've really been addicted to you. All of my attention I've been giving to you. Caught up in my feelings, I got feelings for you. Caught up in my feelings, I got feelings for you. On my mind, I can't lie. On my mind, I can't lie. Pull you down till you dry. Pull you down till you dry. All the time, ease my mind. All the time, ease my mind.
All right, guys, we're going to have a powerful discussion on today. And a couple of days ago, I talked about the inner sanctum of masculinity. And one of the parts as it relates to the inner sanctum of masculinity is more or less getting a woman that can more or less assuage your inner sanctum. But the question remains, does sexual addiction reduce wife readiness? Now listen, many times when it comes down to sexual addiction, we think about sexual addiction many times in the context of males. And while men are more prone to sexual addiction because of higher testosterone levels, could it be that some of the women in society are actually undiagnosed sex addicts? And if that is the case, what role does it play as it relates to wife readiness, as it relates to infidelity, also as it relates to her past concerning body count and also toxic men? So we're going to explore this show on today, and we're going to ask ourselves the question, ladies and gentlemen, as I seek to more or less bring clarity in this timely discussion: are modern women undiagnosed sex addicts? Because sexual addiction has been on the rise and has been seen in men many times, especially those dealing with pornography. But the question remains that are modern women sex addicts and they don't know anything about it? So we need to have a conversation on today, and we need to explore the dynamics associated with sexual readiness or wife readiness, and also unresolved issues from the past. According to some research studies, 30% of men are virgins. And if 30% of men are virgins, then what are they going to get in return if some of the women they're dealing with have been promiscuous or also potentially sex addicts? Now listen, in the clinical world, guys, we talk about something called paraphilias. And a paraphilia is associated with sexual behaviors. Sometimes paraphilias can be tied into sex addictions, but also sadomasochism, exhibitionism, voyeurism, pedophilia, and a list of many different things. And because of that, we got to ask ourselves the question: how does it add to the current conversation as it relates to relationships? Can the past and having undiagnosed sex addictions impact a woman or man in a negative way, but more importantly, women, because many men are the prize catchers in relationships? Now listen, we're going to have an expose, and this is an intro I want you guys to look at real quick. And I got several that I want you guys to look at and listen to. But the question remains, is the modern woman a sex addict? And how did that more or less impede her ability to pair bond with her potential mate and or her potential husband, because men are the prize catchers? Listen.
So you may have heard that how you act when you're single, when you're young, when you're in college, has little to no impact on your ability to maintain a long-term relationship or your ability to even get married one day. But the reality is, that is totally false. The higher the body count, the lower the value. Your body count has a direct impact in your ability to sustain and maintain a long-term relationship, especially in marriage. And while I know it's really popular right now to want to redefine what does it mean to be a 3 or 4 or basically a hoe, the fact still remains that men, especially men today who are looking for wives, are not interested in women that have a lot of mileage. They're just not. One of the ways that men, especially, godly men or serious men who are looking for wives, one of the ways that they judge women is their body count, is how many partners they've had, how many men that they have been with, how many people they've been with. And, as I mentioned before, generally speaking, the higher the body count, the more amount of partners you've had, the less your value becomes in the sexual and dating marketplace. Now, that doesn't mean that as a woman, if you've had a lot of partners, you don't have value intrinsically. You're not a good person, per se, that God doesn't love you. It doesn't mean any of those things. What I'm saying as far as how you're being rated by men in the dating marketplace, it's going down.
I'm going to do a psychic soul train, Ingram, after you add to the conversation, starting with you. What percentage of women, I think I asked a question earlier, maybe I did because I got so much going on in my head, but what percentage of women do you think are wife ready or worthy of a ring? What percentage? Go ahead.
Okay, this is going to be a little rough to what the brother was saying. In my opinion, based upon what I see in the current, it's worse for me now at this age. I'm 47. It's horrible for me because it's a difficult world, but I'll get into that a little later. But the brother he's saying, there's a reason why the expectations is so high. We start from the age of teenagers. Obviously, there's consequences to sexual liberation. Okay, there's consequences of having 75% of the household where there's no men involved, no father, kids weren't being born that way. Yes, men have a responsibility, but by the time a woman can get to that point where she gets serious with a guy, I'm just going to say the reason why you're having these high expectations is because these women have been viciously and vigorously pounded here in this market. They have been pounded hard. So they've been out here, they've dated 20 guys, have ran through them, dudes with baseball bats in their pants. You're coming to the table with a woman that's had 40, 50 bodies on her. She going to remember that. You know what I mean? That's what you're competing against. You're competing against the 20 other guys that have been there before you. But in terms of women being wife ready, I would say in terms of having the right mental and virtues, what I'm seeing here, maybe 10% of the women in this country.
It doesn't mean that a woman did. Thank you, Ms. Parker did. Thank you, sweetie. And CGCLA. But once again, this show is going to more or less parallel and talk about the importance of, or if sexual addictions can more or less increase or reduce the wife readiness for the typical modern woman. We always try to work and or pontificate the importance of marriage and also solutions. But the question remains, are there some women that are more or less not wife ready because they have a high body count? And high body count is subjective. What's high for some men might be low for other men. Some men don't care. But 30% of men that are virgins, they care. And masculine men in general do care. We understand that people are human. But just like women have preferences and more or less sometimes judge or more or less associate men based on their past, especially if he's been entered by a man, the penetration principles remains the same as it relates to some of the women. The sexual revolution has caused or more or less been a death kill for many in relationships. Some women are more or less carrying the burden and the pain of their past because they've been imprinted by toxic, dusty men that broke their heart, men that lied to them, men that more or less tried to get them in relationships, and the woman was looking for a relationship and the man lied just to get what he wanted. But the question remains, when you look at women like Madonna of the past, when you look at the icon like Cardi B of today, is that more or less synonymous of some women with undiagnosed sexual addictions? And if those sexual addictions are paramount, then what are the outcomes for the women that have boys? What are the outcomes for the 30% of men that are virgins? What are the outcomes for the men that are invisible to many women? Because now, guys, you got average women that look their nose down on very average men. They look their nose down on average men. You got chicks like Lizzo that think she deserves Captain America. But Lizzo is nowhere near the stature of a man like Captain America. And so the question remains, in the contextual framework of understanding human relationships and human dynamics, is, has Cardi B, Madonna, and more or less other icons of hedonism more or less impacted modern women as it relates to sexual addictions? Can many modern women adequately pair bond with a man? Can they pair bond to the point that once they get in the relationship, they become bored because their prior sexual experiences more or less preclude them or hinder them from more or less getting in a very strong relationship? Were women of the old better because they knew the value of maintaining their virtue? And so, as I said today earlier, guys, this is not a point of indictment. This is not to make people feel bad. But watch this. Just like there are things that men have done that have come back to hurt them, sometimes your past cannot precede you. And there are men that have had negative things in their past that when it comes down to women, those women will not date them if there are things in their past that does not appeal to her psyche as a woman. And that's why we're having these conversations, guys, as it relates to relationships and also as it relates to helping our women move forward and understanding what men want as well. Because when men more or less get their needs met, they become the better version of themselves. How many ladies that are listening at this show tonight have been broken and still struggle with the images of the past based on bad relationships or men that broke their hearts? How many women are more or less dealing with, as it relates to sometimes having a hard time bonding in a relationship because she often thinks about her ex? How many women still remember the first time that man made your toes curl? Like that, like the witch on the Wizard of Oz. And so the question remains is, how can she be in a very caring, loving relationship if she's struggling with the past, or if she have undiagnosed sexual addictions that are reducing her ability to be wife ready? And there are many stories behind this, guys. There are many stories behind this whole connotation. Some say that it don't matter, but some believe that it does matter. And because it does matter, many feel that that many modern women are not worthy of even taking serious because their sexual past precedes them and they might have undiagnosed sexual addictions. When you look at some of the women, when it comes down to relationships, they can get over a guy early and easy. But in the past, when it came down to relationships, guys, many times when a woman had a lower body count, it was easy for her to pair bond because that's the only man that she knew. Women of the past were very clingy when it came down to sex. But now if a woman get with a guy, she can move on faster because it doesn't bother her as much, because could it be that the oxytocin has been burnt out in her because she's had so many people? And so, we always ask the women what they want, but women forgot to understand what men want. Because what a lot of men are saying is this: when it comes down to sex and sexuality, sex is very easy for a woman. Sex is very easy for a woman, but for the average guy, it's very hard. Thus, you have 30% of men that are virgins. So to the women that have boys, there might be virgins that have very low body counts. What are they going to get in return compared to some of the modern women they have more or less been influenced by the Cardi B's of the world. And if you're a Gen Xer or baby boomer, you were influenced by Madonna. Madonna had very suggestive lyrics in the past as it relates to relationships. So we're going to ask ourselves the question, how much does that play a role in helping a man get the best outcomes that he desires as it relates to relationships and also as it relates to moving forward? Now watch this. In a relationship, ladies, as a young lady said earlier, your humanity has nothing to do with your SMV, which is your sexual market value. And as I told you guys before in the past, men of the past knew that, and also women of the past knew that. They knew that their SMV was very important if they wanted to get a quality man. I think men and women 40 to 50 to 60 years ago were better in relationships because they didn't have a lot of experience. But now with the advent of social media, the advent of the sexual liberation movement, we're going to ask ourselves the question, is it that many relationships are faltering because so many women have had, triple digit body counts? And like I said, this is not to more or less, assail anyone in a negative way, but we always talk about solutions. We always say, what do the men want? What do the men want in relationships? And I'm going to tell you that a very masculine man don't want him to have to go out in the public and, he goes see some dudes and they say, yo, that's you. You might like, what do you mean that's you? Oh, yeah, man, college, man, she slept with the whole football team. Or she slept with 40 to 50 guys. Most men can't handle that because they're not wired to accept that, because men by nature, when it comes down to relationships, are very dominant. Bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. So if you want the ring from a man, you got to ask yourself the question, what are you giving him in return? Because in fair exchange, there is no robbery. And so there are some guys that say, don't ask. Well, how do you equivocate that as it relates to the men that are virgins or the men that have low body counts? Because sex for women is very easy. If a woman wanted to, she could have 100 partners a year if she wanted to. But a man can't. That's why men get infuriated when it comes down to women that more or less did not value themselves, or women that more or less did not maintain their virtue as women. And that's why men struggle, because men are not wired to deal with women that have had a lot of fun. We understand that you're human. Men are not knocking women from having, a couple of relationships. We get that. But we do understand that the lower the number, the better. And depending on how the man was raised, he might say, if you're not a virgin, you can't be with me. But see, many guys are, saying that, she wants traditional values. She wants a traditional man, pay all the bills, put his life on the line, and do the things that grandfather and great-grandpa did. But guess what grandpa and great-grandfather got back in the past? They got women that were wife-ready, women that didn't have 5, 6 kids by multiple men or no kids at all, and women that were virgins or had low bodies. And see, that's just a common denominator, guys, as it relates to relationships. It's just a common denominator as it relates to relationships. You got women that come into relationships deeming themselves the prize. They are very arrogant and haughty. And, they look down on men, or they're trying to shame men by saying he got, little penis energy, when the man say that he wants certain things in a woman, which is a form of reverse psychology. But suppose that man said, no, I don't have little penis energy. You got big V energy because you've been with so many people. And so that's what a lot of men are saying as it relates to current relationships. They want a woman that they can be proud of, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Dr. Drew Pinsky talked about it in the past. I remember a show that he had, and he was saying that men are not wired to accept it, and we're not, especially if you're very masculine. Like I said before earlier, we're not knocking nobody for being human. We know people, got a pass. But you got chicks that been with 50, 60, 100 men, 30, 40 to 100 men, and every man is different, but you saying you want a top tier man, masculine men are they're not going to accept that. They can't accept it. And I get it, I know sometimes it's shameful for some of the women to talk about things like that, but guess what? Men feel the same way when they come down to talking about their financial history. Some women say, well, that's none of your business. Well, you're right. It is none of his business if he's not going to be in a long-term relationship with you. It's none of his business. You're correct. But it is his business when he decides to put a ring on your finger. No more than you being intrusive and asking him about his financial history. Some women ask men about their package size. Is that her business? So we got to have these conversations, ladies and gentlemen, because, there is a cadre of men or a platoon of men that want good quality women. And there are some women that are very humble. They're able to come to the table and talk about their past and be honest. There are some good sisters that say, listen, I made some mistakes. Shout out to those sisters. But there are many that will lie and try to more or less sell virtue in order to get a man. And what those men are saying is that, how is this going to benefit me long term when it comes to being a very masculine man? And so you're going to ask yourself the question, why is sex so easy for women in modern times? What did good men in the past get when it comes down to relationships? Have you gentlemen dealt with women that had a high body count and you know that it more or less impacted the relationship? Because in some studies, they say that women that have high bodies have a hard time, it's not hard time, but sometimes have undiagnosed or have mental illness related to anxiety and also depression. I'm going to look at this little quick clip real quick, guys. Hold tight. I'm going to show you guys something. And you guys tell me what you think. It talks about understanding sexual addiction in women. Because we know that men traditionally are sex addicts, but how about understanding sex addiction, sexual addictions in women? People sometimes think that sexual addictions is a male-only disorder that women are not susceptible to. This is not the fact in case. Unfortunately, female sex addicts can be more powerful, more difficult to identify, and treat male sex addicts primarily because they tend to downplay their sexual involvement, instead discussing the issues in terms of relationships, dating, and intimacy. Because of this, clinicians must sometimes read between the lines, looking and listening for romance-oriented language and behaviors that can initially indicate sexual addictions, such as a lengthy history of short, failed, sexually charged romantic relationships, serial or multiple ongoing sexual and romantic affairs, using seduction and manipulation to avoid the feelings of abandonment and isolation. And many times, guys, you could be dealing with women that have borderline personality disorders. And many women that have borderline personality disorders actually use sex to help them deal with the void of emptiness. Equating sexual intensity with the feeling of being in love, a history of inappropriate, dysfunctional romantic or sexual relationships with bosses, subordinates, married men, siblings, neighbors, etc. A history of high-risk sexual activity, dangerous partners, public sex, anonymous sex, unprotected sex. A history of pairing alcohol and or not using drug use with relationships. A pattern of staying with or using or returning to abusive, neglectful, emotional, unavailable partners. Reoccurring periods of avoiding sex, sometimes while simultaneously engaging in other self-soothing escapist behavior like drinking, drugging, binge eating, compulsive spending, etc. Ending up in prostitution as a cover for addictive sexual problems, often reenacting early life sex abuse, because there are some women that were molested that more or less exacerbate or more or less cause them to become sex addicts. Women that are more or less abused through molestation can become hypersexual. It can also happen in men, but we tend to more or less understand the association or have a level of empathy and sympathy with women as it relates to their sexual pathologies. But many times, as it relates to men, we tend to demonize men. You think about R. Kelly, for example. He was molested multiple times, but we don't want to talk about that. A pattern of trading sex for companionship, money, shelter, gifts, alcohol, or drugs of safety. A pattern of paired struggles with food and sex. Presenting the world as a sexual object more than a whole person. For example, leading with sexuality, short skirts, no underwear, lots of cleavage, heavy makeup, and etc. And so most female sex addicts view their problem as being more about their search for partnership, love, and intimacy than the sex life. Though their behavior is inconsistent with anything resembling a legitimate search for a mate, even when they are having sex several times a day with people they met on hookup apps, dating sites, and social media and elsewhere, they tend to describe the behaviors in terms of their dating life and their inability to find out one, rather than as a problem with compulsive sexual behavior. And so, guys, the question remains that, are modern women sex addicts? Are they dealing with sexual addictions? Are they dealing with sexual addictions, and can they pair bond with the right man because they have more or less been subjugated to the lust of the flesh? Now listen, guys, get the likes up. All the comments coming in, guys, get the likes up. Thank you guys for listening. If you guys have not, please share the content. I'm going to read through a couple of these comments, and I'm going to have my special guest on in a few minutes. Ted, I know you're in the background, brother, so I got you. Just relax. I got you. I got some more things I need to show, but I'm going to bring you on in a few. So if you can see me, Ted, if you hear me, just throw a thumb up. Throw a thumb up if you hear me. If you can hear me, Ted, put a thumb up. Hold on.
Yeah,
Ted.
yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna drop you down. I just want to make sure you're on, but I'm gonna bring you on in a few minutes. I got a couple more things to run, but just relax and enjoy the show. Okay, I'll bring you on in a few. All right.
Good enough.
All right. So once again, guys, share the content, and we're gonna have a powerful discussion on tonight because it's very important that we do what's necessary to help our women get the best outcomes that they want, but understanding what men want as it relates to relationships. We have to understand what men want, guys, as it relates to relationships. So I got another clip I want to show you guys, and we're going to talk about it. Hold tight. We are going to talk about it because we forgot to ask the men what they wanted in relationships. We forgot to ask the men what they wanted in relationships, and many men will lie to our women instead of telling them the truth. And ladies, sometimes you lie to yourselves. So hold tight. Because this is a show, and this more or less piggyback on what Kevin Samuels talked about. Give me a minute. Hold on.
A high value man should do, because you ain't got one. And if you had one, you couldn't keep her. And one of the main...
And that's one of the problems and the issues, guys, that women keep forgetting. As I've said before in the past, men are the prize catchers. They determine if the woman that they want to marry meets their standards. Men are very serious when it comes down to making a woman his wife. But as many of the content creators said before earlier, that when a woman has a past that's very deleterious to her future, many times men are not going to take her serious for a wife. So as I said before, in the past, she can be the prize in her head. But until that man determines if she's prize worthy, she'll never get the ring. She's just a prize in her head if the man that she wants doesn't want her.
Reasons when asking men of value as to why they cannot deal or date women who are on the same level, socioeconomic status, is something that keeps coming up. This whole notion of body count. Yeah, we're going there tonight. Body count. Many modern women don't believe their body count. You ask the average one.
And that's the sadness for a lot of women. You know, see, a lot of women say they want men to be traditional, but they are modern. What did a man get 60 years ago in a traditional wife-rated woman? The majority of the time, he got a woman that was a virgin to very low bodies. She had no kids, and she was trained by her mother and her aunts and her grandmother on how to come into the relationship ready to serve her man so that they can build a legacy. But the problem remains is that many women want men to be traditional, meaning provider, protector, builder, someone that's going to add value. But what is that man getting in return? And what men got in return from the past were women that were wife-ready and had very low bodies, or they were virgins. But men are not getting that anymore, which in essence could be tied to many women may have undiagnosed sexual addictions, which is in essence is impeding their ability to be the kind of woman that men need, which in essence has caused a very high divorce rate.
woman, she'll tell you body count don't matter. Ask the average man, he'll tell you body count matters. Ask the average man, he's going to lie about his body count and adjust the numbers up. Ask the average woman, she's going to knock her number down. So and one thing that I will say, that ladies, focus like a laser on what I'm about to say. That when women speak about men, women speak about 100% of men, but they're really only talking about the 20% of men that they find attractive. But then you extrapolate that to 100% of men. Here, let's do a simple experiment. Jessica X, what's going on? Ladies in the chat room, let me ask you a question. Ladies in the chat room, what percentage of men in the society, And
it matters, ladies, because men by nature are very territorial. There was a doctor by the name of Dr. Drew Pinsky, and he talked about, and I agree with Dr. Drew, most men and most masculine men are not wired to accept it. Now listen, there are some men that will lie to you and say that they don't care, or they are simps, or they're men that have very low values. But when it comes down to making a woman bone of his bone, flesh of his flesh, most men, ideally, if they're men of virtue and they're men of faith, they want a woman that either is a virgin to low bodies. And even better if she doesn't have children, because men want to have their own legacy. And see, for so long, we always talk about what she wants, but nobody talks about what he wants. Many times, some of these women in modern times call men broke, bums, dusty, small phallus, short, and men just take it. But when men start saying what they want, then all of a sudden it's a problem. Because men by nature, ladies, are very territorial, and most men, based on their hard drive and their wiring, don't want to have the thought of multiple men touching their future woman. Keep listening.
Percentage of single men in society have a consistent sex life. What percentage of single men in our country are having consistent sex life? Let's define consistent. At least once I don't know, how do you want to define consistent? Once a month? It's 12 times a year. How many men in this country are having sex at least once a month? Ladies only. I want to see these numbers. %40, 30%, 85%, 80 to 90%, 80%. Once a week, 2 to 3 times a week. Ladies, understand something. 30% of men will never have children. 30% of the male population has always been locked out of the sexual marketplace. And I need you ladies to know, especially under the age 25, the average 25-year-old woman has had more sex than the average 25-year-old man. At any given time, about 30% of men are sexless in this.
And Kevin is correct. And that's why men are very angry and they become very perturbed, because sex for women is very easy. The average woman, if she wanted to, ladies and gents, could have 100 men if she wanted to per year, if she chose to recklessly give her body away, if she had a very severe sexual addiction. But because women are very selective many times on the type of men that they want, because of hypergamy, they still can have a high level or a high quotient of men. So what men are saying is that it's nothing wrong, ladies, to want to have sex, because wanting to have sex is very normal and very biological. But the cue is this: do you have the discipline and the character to protect your body, which is your temple? And when you give your body away to multiple men, not only does it impact you in a mental way, but there's a type of science that some call it junk science called microchimerism. It posits that man's DNA if you're having sex unprotected, remains in your body for a period of time. And I'm going to pose a question, as the title more or less speaks for itself. Are some modern women sex addicts? And because of that sexual addiction, do the man that they marry or that man that get a woman that has a high body count, what can she offer that man? Because to her, sex really means nothing because she's seen it all and she's done it all. Now, I know there are certain circumstances where a woman may have been molested. That's different. But in general, for women that just like to have fun or hot girl summer, or they were conditioned to have a lot of sex, or when they were in college, what men are saying, what am I getting in return? Because many men know that many women are not forthright and honest when it comes down to their past. There are some good women that will tell the truth, but many will lie. And so I would ask the question, if a woman lies about her past prior to getting in a relationship, could that marriage be a no? Because it's sex fraud. I mean, not sex fraud, it's marriage fraud. And most men, when they get in relationships, want to feel comfortable that when they go out in the public, that they're not being mocked or laughed at because multiple men has had their woman. Keep listening.
Country. Where do you think the MGTOW movement came from? Where do you think the incel movement came from? But see, when you ladies think about men, you think about the men that you are attracted to. This is why they say all men cheat, all men are dogs, all men are trash, this, that, and the third. And especially as you go up the scale in women, from the 5s to the 6s, from the 6s to the adjustable 6s, to the 8s, 9s, and 10s. The 8s, 9s, and 10s all tend to have the same story about men because they're all dealing with the same upper echelon of men. So when you ladies are speaking about your experiences, understand, when you say body count doesn't matter, understand you're talking about 30% of the male population who ain't having any sex.
Right.
None, zero, zero, stingy with dinero. Body count does matter. Body count matters to these men because you can't tell a man who has had, at 30 years old, who's had 1, 2, 3, 4 sexual partners, and you've had 4 this month, 4 this quarter, that it's no big deal. They're going to beg to disagree because you're far more experienced than these men.
Right. And what happens a lot of times, because men are very conquering in nature by nature, many men don't have to deal with the anxiety of knowing that he was a better lover than me, he was bigger than me, and he got to deal with the ghost of her past because he feels like she didn't practice sexual discipline. As I said before in the past, it takes a very virtuous and a very disciplined woman to regard her body and not give it away to multiple men. That's why men, when you think about a dog, more or less, as you think about bone, his bone, flesh, his flesh, when it comes down to a dog that's a pedigree dog, if another dog has licked that bone or bit that bone, then that dog will sniff it and he'll move on because the dog doesn't see that bone as valuable. And the more she gives her body to multiple men, it devalues her. It does not devalue her as a human being, but it does devalue her on the sexual market when it comes down to a serious man that want to take her serious for his wife. Now listen, it doesn't mean that a woman has had a past, she's a bad person. And, low bodies is subjective. What one man might say is too many, the next man might say it's okay. But in general, ladies, the lower the bodies or the closer to a virgin that you are, the better that man can see you as special. As I said earlier, some men don't care, but many men do care. Keep listening.
Why is all this important? Because modern women, when you have this conversation, what do modern women think they can go from 304 phase to housewife? And what does 304 mean? It's the platform friendly way of saying hoe. Hoe. Let's define what that means. The hoe phase. What is the hoe phase? So we all have a common definition. I'm going to go pull it up right now. So we'll all have a common definition to work for. But I know what I think of it as. But I want to make sure that we all have a common definition. Hoe phase is a stage in someone's life where they run emotional sexual experiments. Urban Dictionary says it's a phase in your life that occurs when you are fine with exploring promiscuous activities and connecting with random people. And these phases tend to happen after breakups of serious relationships, or with most people that think of it happening in your youth, in your college years. How long should this phase last? Because I hear women sitting back talking about every woman has a whole phase. But then I'll listen to women who consider themselves to be a cut above the rest, and they say that women don't have whole phases. I think every woman's had a whole phase. I think most attractive women have had a whole phase. The problem is, especially if we want to narrow it down to our community, your whole phase should be 2 years at best. Your freshman year in college, your sophomore year in college. That's when it was supposed to be over. You should have been done with your 304 phase your sophomore year in college. Because that's when Becky, Marisol, Myling, and Jamila, junior year in college, 20 years old, that's when they were hanging up their jersey, and they start looking for the guys in medical school, law school, Wall Street, etc. This is why so many women in college are able to do what they do, experiment and explore, and then hang up their jersey. But in our community, women want to have this phase for a decade. And they sit around talking about, well, how else would you know what fits you? Well, I got news for you, ladies. You're not supposed to be having this many partners to begin with. That's not how it was intended to happen. But we know we're living in a modern dating environment. So the question really becomes, I want to know, do you modern women think you can go from active hoe phase to housewife? Even do you think you can go from extended hoe phase to housewife? If you've had a
and I will say unequivocally no, because unless she's a woman that's godly and she's striving daily to consecrate herself unto God, I would say no, because once many times I would say many of these women, if things are going bad in their relationship or they're not getting the attention, I would say more no than yes, because of the temptation that goes from the past. She might get a man that's a good man, he's an average lover, but she's used to men that make her body feel a certain way. Now that man is dealing with sexual anxiety and performance anxiety because he's trying to compete with the ghosts of her past. And as I said earlier, men of value and men of standard, especially men that are very masculine, they don't want to deal with that those kind of issues in a relationship. And listen, there are some guys that say you can't ask or don't ask, but I say I disagree with that to some degree. Because what do you say to the men that are virgins? Do they go into a relationship, don't ask about her past? Or a man that had low bodies himself? Do he go into a relationship where say, well, don't ask because you can't handle it? And so it should never get to a point where a man can't feel good about himself to ask a woman about her past with fear that, the number exceeded what he wants in a relationship, or the woman he wants to be his wife or the mother of his future children. And so some are trying to minimize and say, it's none of your business. And you're correct. It is none of that person's business if you're not trying to get into a relationship. But if that man is trying to get into a relationship and he's seeing you as somebody important, he has a right to know. It should be a right to self-disclosure for that man to know. No more than if a woman got with a man and she wanted to know if he had a liaison with another man. Because here's the kicker. The context might be different, but the principle remains the same. It's called the penetration principle. Most women cannot accept the fact if their man or a man they're dealing with has been penetrated or entered by another man. And men feel the same way. Men struggle with the thought of the woman that he loved being entered by multiple men. It's just how we're wired. Men don't have an issue. She had a relationship as much with a woman. Some don't. We might can forgive it a little bit, but then there are some men that see it as repulsive. But the fact remains is that the context can be different, but the principle is the same. Was she entered? And once she's entered in that man's mind, he feels like she's been conquered, and he can't see it as nothing special anymore because she's given away to people that did not earn the right to be inside of her body. Keep listening.
Whole phase past age 21, you're in the category. Understand something. Let's get the likes up, people. That's the first and the last warning. I want you guys to understand something. How many women are out and about in the city right now talking about, oh, I'm just enjoying myself. I'm just doing what I do. Okay. I'm just doing what I do. If you look in today's environment, a long relationship hits the spreadsheet at 6 months. So if you're a woman and you lost your virginity at age 18, which is late, it's really late. But let's just say 16, like most. 16, and you have one new partner every 6 months. 16, that means a woman can get out of high school. Many women are getting out of high school with bodies in the double digits. But let's say you were a late bloomer and you started hooking up, doing whatever in college. Relationships are on the downslope because of the whole golden pea syndrome. It's not uncommon for women I've heard women on panels talking about having 3 partners a month.
Wow.
And saying that what was that craziness I heard? 3 partners didn't have their cycle, and as though their cycle was going to reset the environment of some sort. Ladies, what do you think?
And that goes back to the science called microchimerism. The science of microchimerism. Some call it junk science. Some say that it's not substantiated in empirical science, but I think there's some truth to it. The gospel talks about defilement, that in the book of Leviticus, if a woman would sleep with a man and he put his essence inside of her, she was seen as defiled. But to take it to a higher level as it relates to science, many believe that when a woman allows a man to put his essence inside of her, that his DNA remains in her for the duration of her life, and some of it actually goes inside her brain. And so if you could think of a woman that's, more or less not using protection, and she's had, say, 40 to 50 guys, and she had an IUD, can you guys see the correlation why so many of them are dealing with mental illnesses up to sexual addictions or paraphilias, or having neurotic tendencies and or psychotic tendencies because they are not stable? And sometimes that rampant promiscuity can also lead to anxiety and depression because women are containers. They are not designed to have multiple men inside of them. Now watch this. Men and women ideally should come to the table being chaste or virgins, ideally. But sex does not impact men like that as much as it does women. It can make a man become neurotic, but it doesn't impact him emotionally like it does women. And that's why it's so important, because she is a container, not to give her virtue away, because she's not giving anything for her husband once they get married, and it can impact the relationship because women produce oxytocin. And the more sex they have, the more oxytocin they produce. But if they're having unnormal amounts of sex, many times the oxytocin can actually burn out because the feeling and the thrill is gone. And so when she gets with a man, it's nothing special. He can't please her. Once times get tough, she's ready to bail out because she's bored and her body is used to multiple men.
Think is going on? The question is, how many bodies exclude you from housewife? Housewife is the woman who after marriage doesn't want to have to work to pay significant bills. Housewife is the woman who doesn't want to be responsible for more than 20% or 20% of the overall family financial load. Housewife is the woman who wants to live this life to where if she decides to work or not to work, her lack of income would not significantly impact the family in any real way. Well, understand something, ladies. Men who can afford to provide these kind of lifestyles, they tend to have a standard for women. And they don't want women who have a lot of miles on them.
Right. And that's what guys are saying. Ideally, virgin to low bodies. Because what men are saying is that you want traditional outcomes, but you're not traditional yourself. As I stated earlier, when a man got 20, 30, 40, maybe I say 50 to 60 years ago, was a woman that was a virgin. She was wife ready, trained to be a wife, and she didn't have children. And I've heard my grandmom said, or even some, they were saying maybe one, if a woman had been over two at one point in her life, it greatly diminishes her ability to be a virtuous woman. And there's science behind that. Even though the numbers are not necessarily statistically significant, it definitely plays a role as it relates to pair bonding and being able to have a relationship where she's not damaged from hurt and pain from men that use her only for sex.
So if you're out like so many single women living life doing this whole Sex in the City thing, understand something. Is being in that phase of your life keeping you single? At what point do you have to hang up your jersey, put the kitty cat in the driveway, and get a makeover? Let's understand it. Let's get it. Ladies, why do so many of you ladies get upset when somebody asks you about your body count? Like I was on Instagram. I posted something Saturday on Instagram. I'll show it right now. I'll show it to you guys right now, because there's so many things today with modern women that modern women tell each other that these things are okay, but are the things you guys that are saying cool? What men have signed off on this stuff? Because if you guys are just telling yourselves that, if you ever want to have a relationship with a man, you understand that men have a say in this too. So here's a picture of a woman who says, "I'm expecting." And my caption was, "Congratulations. When's the wedding? Thoughts?" Or, "Congratulations. I didn't know you got married." That post right there got over 2,000 comments in just a few hours. And some women were livid. Inappropriate question. You shouldn't be asking that kind of question. This, that.
And that's the Medusa complex, guys, that I talked about, that's predicated on death. It's a Medusa complex because many don't have the wherewithal to look within themselves. But some would say that it's an inappropriate question for a man to ask that, but it wasn't inappropriate 60 years ago because that was the golden norm and the golden standard. But on the flip side, many women feel that it's okay to ask a man how much money that he makes. It's okay to ask him how big his penis is, directly or indirectly by touching it. It's okay to ask him if he have kids. It's okay to ask him does he have the opportunity to provide for her long term, and what are his future intentions. It's okay to ask him personal questions, but him being the prize catcher can't ask her about something that's very important to him. And that's the hypocrisy that we see in so many relationships, because it's not inappropriate, because if a man decides to get married, he has a right to know that, because in fair exchange, there is no robbery. And that was the fair exchange 50 to 60 years ago. The woman came to the table, low bodies to virgin, no children. The man came to the table ready to build a legacy, protect, and provide for his woman and provide for his community and the children. It was just a fair exchange. But you're expecting men to give you something that you can't give him back in return, and that's the hypocrisy.
That it's her body, her choice. Well, yeah, all that's true. And my thing is this, ladies. I told you, I'm the original feminist. I'm an OG feminist. I believe in women having choice. Feminism isn't about quality. Feminism is about choice. But you choose the inputs, you choose the outcomes. Almost 3,000 comments. And ladies, I'm here to tell you, the kind of men that you want for long-term relationships, they do care about a woman's body count. They care. They also care how long you've been out of your quote unquote hoe phase. Why is this important? Because there's so many women in the
Danger zone.
27 to 35 who are call themselves actively on the market to be found for a wife, but still living hot girl summer, still in your hoe phase. Ladies, you know you got that one friend who keeps going back through her Rolodex, or keeps going back through her old text messages and emails, keeps recycling Johnson from Christmas past. How do you expect to have any new relationships or be able to really bond to a man, ladies, if you are in? How is?
And that's why so many guys have great consternation for women that have social media accounts, unless those accounts are more or less predicated on her in a business. Because many times, because of social media now, women can reach back out to guys from the past, and that can keep them in a state of suspended animation where they're more or less living in the past instead of living in the present. And I know many men that say, if you're going to be with me, then you got to get rid of that social media account, because it's not because that man by default is insecure. It's because of the choices that you have and the power that you have makes him feel insecure. And one of Glass's contemporary components to choice theory was the need to have power and freedom. And so now it's an unfair advantage for many men in relationships, because that woman many times can have so much access to so many different men that sometimes she may not want, but men that she's more or less using for emotional infidelity to make her feel good about herself. And a man doesn't want to compete with the physical past of a woman, but he don't want to compete with the ghost in her head. And that's why men are saying, if you want me to put a ring on your finger, you're going to have to follow my rules, because I'm the prize catcher. And that's how men get their power back, and how their inner sanctum is not violated, because they're setting standards. Because if a man doesn't have an inner sanctum, he is at a point where he cannot more or less be the best version of himself or have healthy control of his environment as a man. Men need to have control, healthy control in their environment.
Here's my question, and there's no heat, no judgment for me. I'm asking the question. How does a hoe phase help you become a housewife? How does any of the things that modern women sit around championing help you become the wife you say you want to become? You want to be a boss, power, entrepreneur, All right, cool. What counts more, that or the outcome of family and children? You can't have it all. You got to choose. Do the things you want, do the things women sit around championing, are they helping you with the outcome you say you want? Because I will be honest. I will tell you, my personal standpoint is I don't ask women about their body counts, because I don't believe a woman's going to be honest anyway. I feel like I'm a good enough judge of character at this point, and I vet people close enough because I'm careful.
And that's okay based on what Kevin is saying, because it's obvious that Kevin is an experienced man with sex. But to the 30% of men that are virgins, and to the women that have sons, then that man gotta ask. To the men that have sons, that man gotta ask. Because if that man consecrated himself for religious reasons, or he was trying to be morally upright, or just because women rejected him, he has a right to know as a man, because if he get with a woman that had a lot of fun or want to use him as a beta male provider, it's going to cause a lot of damage for him long term. So I agree and disagree to some degree for men that are very experienced. But for men that are not experienced or virgins, they have to ask that question, because it defeats the purpose. It defeats the purpose of waiting if he can't ask that woman that question. I think that virgin men should get with virgin women. That's my point on that. Virgin men should get with virgin women. And so that man has a right to ask that question.
Careful with myself. So I'm like, all right, ultimately, how is it helping you? Because why is this important? We have had to hear Will and Jada's, all their...
So guys, you get the crux of the issue. We're going to open the panel up in a minute, but we're going to continue to talk about Are there undiagnosed sexual addictions with many modern women? Are there undiagnosed sexual addictions with modern women, which in essence reduces their ability to be wife ready? Because you see, you know, and I know that appears to be the case. Many times, because they had a lot of fun in their past, it reduces greatly their ability to be wife ready. Some will shame a man by saying his phallus is too small or he got to be a certain size before they even give him a chance. But that's not an indictment on that man, the size of his phallus, because that's what he was born with. It's an indictment on her not having discipline as a woman. And it's also an indictment upon her now because she got to deal with men that may not be as well endowed. And men don't want to have to deal with that kind of drama or struggle. Now, some men say they don't care. Kudos to the men that don't care. But every man is different. There are some women that feel the same way about a man having a very extensive past. But for the sake of argument and for the sake of discussion, men are the arbiters of relationships. Men have the power as it relates to deciding if a woman is his wife. And that's why these conversations are so important, because there are a lot of mental pathologies that are permeating, guys, in our culture. So we're going to talk about it. We're going to open the line up. We're going to talk about paraphilias, because philias is the Greek as is associated with sex. Para means many. Some paraphilias could be vaginismus. That can be due to trauma. And we're going to talk about it, guys, in a few minutes. And Ted is going to come on in a minute. And guys, this is just the introduction point. Ted and I are going to have a very poignant discussion talking about sexuality. And you know, we always talk about finding solutions. So one of the solutions, ladies, if you want to get a good man, is strive to respect yourself. Shout out to the good women that are striving, because I know it's very hard in this very hedonistic culture where you have women like Cardi B that has influenced a lot of women to do, you know, things that are more or less not beneficial to them long term. But also women from the past like Madonna, because Madonna and Cardi B, as it relates to the 80s and the current 2000s, are icons that are synonymous to teaching our women that it's okay to be rebellious and promiscuous, and that they deserve the best of men, because top-tier men would not settle for women that's had a lot of fun. They're just not going to, because they're not wired to accept it. As I said earlier, Dr. Drew Pinsky talked about it. Men are not wired to accept their woman being penetrated by multiple men. They're just not. And just like a woman is not wired to accept her man being penetrated by a man. You might say it's different. The context is different, but the principle is the same. It's called the penetration principle, a concept that I created. And it basically means that when a woman is entered by multiple men, in his mind, she loses her value and her virtue, and she's not special anymore. He don't see anything special about the relationship. No different than a woman can't accept a man that's been penetrated by another man. That's why most women don't like men that have been with men, because he's been entered. And so it causes that woman to have a great conniption. It bothers her because it impacts her in a mental way. So Dre, the acronym for DEF, stands for this, meaning when you present them with the evidence, they deny the evidence. They become enraged when you present them with the evidence. They will argue with you, do ad hominem attacks, and they fight or flee, which is cognitive dissonance, which is synonymous to death. So there are some good women that are striving. To the young lady Tamika, you know, these men are very serious. So, you know, they, you know, I got, you know, Top Gun is, you know, he's an enforcer. And a lot of these brothers are serious. So they don't know if you're just trying to be a troll or whatever, but I think your intentions are noble. And I'm grateful that you are asking these questions, because, you know, if you want to be a wife to some man at some point, you want to do everything in your power to preserve yourself as a woman, because men are not wired to have the thoughts of different men touching their woman if they're going to take you serious. And that's why men don't see the benefit, especially to the 30% of men that are virgins and are invisible, because those 30% that are virgins, they should get women that are virgins. But what are they getting if a woman can have 30 partners in a year? Easy. A woman can be with 100 men easy in a year if she chooses to. Shout out to my man, James Turner, for the $25 super sticker. Thank you, brother. I really appreciate everything you've done. And to the brothers that gave me $5 earlier, guys, share the content. I need you guys to share the content to the 47 that are listening. If you guys have not donated, please donate to Cash App, $7 Smalls. I tell you guys, and I don't like to say it over and over again, This show literally took me about 5 hours to put together, literally. I called my man Ted a few minutes earlier, and he came in tomorrow. I'm going to have him break down things as well. But this show literally took me 5 to 6 hours to put together because these shows are very time-consuming. If you like what I'm doing, share the content. Shout out to men like James Turner that always come through. Top Gun, the other brothers that always show me love because it helps me with time production. It helps me be more invigorated to do this work. And also, it helps compensate for putting the time and the effort to bring you guys good content. As I told you guys before in the past, I've invested a lot of money in what I'm trying to do. And ladies, this show is not to shame you or try to hurt your feelings. It's not. But it's more or less giving you a synopsis about what men want. It's giving you a synopsis because men are very territorial. Men are very territorial. A man needs a woman that he can feel like no other man has imprinted her. When you come into a relationship and you've been imprinted by multiple men, you can be married to a man, but you can still think about the man that you gave your body to in the past. Sometimes you can have emotional issues and you don't even know why you're having those emotional issues because you have been imprinted by that man because you are a container. You contain or more or less are insular, and you can feed the feedback from that man. You get the feedback from that man. And if you get his essence, that man's imprint or that man's essence remains in your body for life because your body is just like a sponge. It's just like a sponge. It stays in your body for life. And so, once again, ladies, if you want a husband or a chance of getting a good husband or have a more sustainable relationship like your grandparents, keep your body counts low. Strive to keep your body counts low because masculine men can't handle it. It's not in our nature to accept it if you want a good man. As I said before earlier, some guys don't care. Many guys come into a relationship understanding that you had a past. They can work with it to some degree. But sometimes a woman that might have had more partners is not as damaged as a woman that had, say, under 5, but she's had sex with those men a lot. So it just depends. And, that's why this whole thing is so convoluted now because there was a time when men got women that were either virgins or they had women that had under 2 or under 3. Great grandmom, grandmother, they didn't have as much sex as women are having now. Women now have more sex than any time in human history. And I believe, guys, it has led to sexual addictions. Shout out to my man, Peter, the investor, for the $5 super sticker, and also Mr. Abbott. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. So I'm about to bring up Ted Santos. And Ted Santos, how you doing, sir?
Hey, man. How you doing? I'm cool, man. Everything's cool.
No doubt, brother. You and I have talked about this conversation in the past in private. You've done a lot of extensive work, Ted, talking about relationships, and you even wrote a book. Tell the audience about your book and if your book is pertinent to this timely conversation.
Sure. The book, it's called Here's Why You Can't Find Love. And the punchline to the book, everyone claims they're out there looking for love, is that love doesn't create great relationships. Love is a byproduct of a great relationship. So a lot of people are trying to use sex to find love or looking for a chemistry connection and all that stuff. And this chemical connection is natural for us all to experience, but that has nothing to do with love. Love is something that comes out of a great relationship. It's a byproduct of it. It's not the foundation of it. So I wrote the book so that people can understand to build that great relationship. One of the most important things you have to have is compatibility with your significant other. And compatibility is different from having things in common, So maybe you have things in common, like you enjoy travel, you like the same colors, you lived in the same area, you went to the same school, you lived in the same neighborhood, and these are things you can have in common. But when you talk about compatibility, well, now we're looking at more like family values. Integrity, effective communication, how you manage money, how you manage your mental and physical health, how you want to educate and discipline your children. These all become much more important, and they're less likely to change over time. And so I think the biggest problem is people are having is finding a compatible mate so that they don't end up with the wrong person.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So when you think about Ted, your book, as I said earlier, do you think there's any parallels to the conversation? Before you answer that question, thank you guys. Thank you, Top Gun. Top Gun said, fellas and gals, we have to support and amplify our brother. Let's donate. He's giving free game. Thank you, brother. I appreciate that, because at some point this information will be on Patreon. Thank you, brother. Thank you, MC Wellness and Recovery. We're shooting for you in Los Angeles. I will share the content with my recovery and counselor communities. Thank you, brother. And also thank you for Mr. Albert, as I talked about him earlier. Ted, I want to ask you a question. As the Black community appear to be eroding, and when you think about your mother, you know, and when you think about your grandmother, when you think about women in general, were women of the past, if you can recollect, from your mother to your grandmother, were those women promiscuous? And what do you think was the safeguard that more or less reduced promiscuity of the past?
You know, one of the things, so the direct answer is no. And one of the things that opened the door to promiscuity for women was the invention, which came to market commercially in 1960, which was the birth control pill, which, if you think about, before the, Roe versus Wade abortion law, there were a lot of women who died by trying to give themselves abortions. Abortions were illegal. But when the pill came in, it gave women this kind of freedom. And then you look at by the mid to late 1960s, there was this thing called free love. And that really, so with the pill and then this free love, it really changed the dynamics of sexuality in a huge way. But it's still, those women who were, let's say, teenagers and 20s in the 60s, they still had the upbringing from their mothers and grandmothers. So promiscuity wasn't for everyone. But yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Can you hear me, Ted? Can you hear me?
Oh, absolutely, I can.
Right. So while I got you on solo screen, do you think that women like Madonna and Cardi B more or less influence women to be promiscuous, which in essence has led them to having sexual addictions, in your best recollection? I want you to share your insight on that.
So I would say, especially Madonna being decades before Cardi B, I would say they were both a reinforcement. So they are not the catalyst. The catalyst came in the 70s when feminists told women that they could do anything men could do, including sleep with multiple men, that they had the right to do it. So in the 1970s, promiscuity was rampant. A lot of people don't know about it. And we can even go back. The 1920s, if you look at pictures of women in 1918, and then you look at women they call flappers in these short skirts, they were promiscuous. So this whole idea of promiscuity is not new, because the roaring 20s, there was lots of promiscuity. They called them flappers, not thoughts, not whores. And then the 1960s, and especially the 70s, when this whole idea of the nightclub was new to society, it was like this social phenomenon. And so the nightclub scene, and then you had drugs, LSD, angel dust, marijuana, these all became big. So promiscuity was such a big part of the 70s that marriage rates dropped across the board, across all socioeconomic classes. In, I think, let's say 1962, the affluent class had like a 96%, they had a 94% marriage rate. By 1979, they only had an 88% or 84% marriage rate. So we look at today, now that we have promiscuity, that affluent class has not been affected by it. Their marriage rates have remained the same since like 1979. So it's not covering across the board. So everyone that's saying all women have a hoe phase, there are women who are born into a higher socioeconomic class who are not doing that, because the circle of people they know and the men they have access to is much smaller than the average woman. I'll leave it there. But yes, so my book talks about compatibility, because if you don't understand compatibility, you're going to go through a string of people because you don't understand who is right for you. So what you're doing is playing trial and error, and think that you're actually learning something, which, we'll get into a little while later, why that's getting you further away from what you want. I'll stop there.
Ted, if you had to guesstimate the amount of women that are more or less sex addicts, and you're right, there's nothing new under the sun, Ted. There's nothing new under the sun. The 20s and the flapper culture was definitely an icon of promiscuity, but I will challenge that by saying that even though that's the case, and even though the sexual revolution started this downward spiral, there still was a modicum of virtue. I would say that the flapper culture was the exception, it was not the rule. But now promiscuity is the exception, and virtue is no longer the rule. When you look at the women from your mother's past and the women from old, yes, nothing is new under the sun. There were women that were promiscuous back in the old days too. But it was looked down upon, and it was done in the dark. When you go back to the countryside, to the South was very conservative. You saw a lot of that stuff permeate in the North, but universally, Ted, it was not normal in the South, and you might saw it in pockets in the North, but it was not the norm. Even the women in the South that did do it at the juke joints or whatever, it was looked down upon because the beacon of hope at the time was the church. There was a level of shame, and there was a modicum of virtue that was associated in the past. But now, when you look at icons like Madonna, Madonna's from the 80s, and then you got Cardi B, Meg Thee Stallion, now it's the norm. And so I believe, Ted, that there are a lot of women that have undiagnosed sexual addictions now, because many of them said that if a man doesn't have a certain phallus size, keep moving. Some will say, your phallus got to be at least 9 inches, some say 10, and so the average guy is, I think studies say, under 5 inches, and that's, I don't know if that's flaccid or erect. And black men tend to be slightly bigger, but, anything over 7 is expected to be, above average. And then when you start getting in the 8, 9, and 10, there are some men that big, but that's not the norm. And so if that woman has been imprinted by a man with a large phallus, you get a man coming in trying to be like the Lone Ranger on the horse. Remember Lone Ranger when he was riding Silver? He said, he's trying to please her, but many times he feels like he can't please her because his phallus is not big enough, which in essence lead to sexual anxiety. What's your take on that?
So there are a few things. Two, one is, and I heard you, I didn't hear all that you were saying when you were reading a study, but NIH references a study that was done in New Zealand, and it talks specifically about women. They looked at women and how promiscuity causes anxiety and depression and could lead to drug addiction. And in the worst case, promiscuity in women leads to serious mental health disorders. One health disorder is called hybristophilia. And hybristophilia is a person who is sexually aroused by someone who's a criminal. So a rapist, a drug dealer, a robber, someone who is, or even a guy who's committing infidelity, a married man who's cheating. So there are women who are literally sexually aroused, and they will have a difficult time being in a stable relationship with a man who is considered, a high caliber man, because they're looking for the deviants, the social deviants, the criminals, the liars and thieves. And that's called hybristophilia. It is a real mental disorder. And a lot of women get that because they've been traumatized. Well, there's a book called Hooked. It's called Hooked: New Science on How Casual Sex is Affecting Our Children. It's written by Joe McElhaney and Frida Bush. They're both gynecologists. And one of the things they talk about in their book is called bond break. So when a woman has sex with a man, she secretes this oxytocin endorphins, dopamine, but oxytocin is a major component. It's a neuroscience. I mean, a neurochemical, and it causes women to bond with their children, bond with their mate. But when she secretes it, even if it's a one night stand, and then she breaks off that relationship, if she does that enough times, it starts to create emotional trauma to her brain, and she could negatively impact her ability to secrete oxytocin. So she's not going to bond with a man the way you think. So I question whether these are what you call sexual addictions, because if she can't get the oxytocin secretion, which is like the love drug, it's like a high.
Right.
If she can't get that, then she looks for the other high, which is dopamine, which is heroin secretes dopamine, right? So they are after this biochemical secretion that feels good, and it's a dopamine high. So either you're buying me stuff, I'm having sex with married men, or just having sex with multiple, because these are all excitement. You hear these women talking about, you have to take me on dates, that I have to have excitement, because they have in a way deformed their brain's normal functioning capacity, because they won't secrete oxytocin. And you have to wonder, how is that going to affect their ability to be a mother and bond with a mother like naturally? So I'm wondering if it's sex is not what they're addicted to. It's the dopamine high that they're after, because they can't get the oxytocin high the way they used to. So they went through bond break. Studies say that when women have sex with 6 different men, she's 3 times less likely to be in an emotionally stable relationship. So the numbers are low for a woman to start to emotionally traumatize her brain. And I'll stop there.
Right. No, you're doing a great job. Hybristophilia is actually tied to the word philia, which basically means a love for something, like necrophilia, which is more or less a connotation with love of the dead, or fondness of having sex with the dead. Hybristophilia more or less sounds like people love violent and abusive men. Pedophilia is all tied to the philias. When you look at the DSM-5, those connotations are actually synonymous, because it's part of what we call paraphilias, and paraphilias is tied to, many times could be tied to sexual deviance. It could be argued, Ted, that because of trauma, some women have developed vaginismus, which basically means that their vagina would not allow a man to enter it due to trauma or due to abuse. And it's sad, but it's also very important, because many of you guys that are single are dealing with very damaged women. Some of these men are very damaged as well, because some of these men have been abused by women. And many times we should put the men in silence because we don't talk about it. Shout out to my man, Karan. Karan, check your phone, brother, and your email. I reached out to you today, so whenever you get ready to chop it up, Karan, let me know. We're going to chop it up in the Tar Heel state, the greatest state of the union. But I did reach out to you earlier today, brother, so thank you for that $5 super sticker. He said paying my Kosher tax 3 or 4 phase without accountability has created a generation of female Frankensteins. All of her body had become her body. Let me ask you a question. Awesome Dre asked a question about, Ted, what's her name? Not Cardi B, but I can't think of the lady. They used to deal with Kanye West, Amber Rose. You see the Amber Roses of the world and the proliferation of something called, the slow walk. I won't say the word. Do you think the love and the aggrandizement of, deviant behavior has caused a lot of our women to have or exhibit narcissistic traits, in your opinion?
Yeah, this whole notion of calling a woman a narcissist, that's tough without, I'll be technical, without properly diagnosing someone and having the tools. I understand we sort of call people narcissists. I won't go there. What I do want to say is I've lived in several countries in Latin America. And in Latin America, like here in the U.S., one of the things that happens is girls and boys are either raped or molested at a young age. And just for the record, the United States is the first country in the world where more men and boys are raped and molested than women and girls. Mm-hmm. But my real point is this. In Latin America, women are raped.
Hey, Ted, hold your point. For the algorithm, just say grape. Yeah, they real foolish about certain words.
All right.
So just say grape.
Okay.
Go ahead, brother. Go ahead.
So the point is this. The women in Latin America are not turning out to be traumatized and angry and going off the rails, even though they're going through the same situation. So there must be something else happening in the United States where we're encouraging women to be more deviant. So in Latin America, just Latinas in the United States, only 12% of them identify as being feminist. Where you look at Caucasian women, the number's like 28%, Asians 26%, and Black American women are 24%. Identify as feminists, but a very small percentage of Latinas. But the biggest point is they are not turning out to be angry, traumatized, and all this deviant behavior, even though they're having the same unfortunate experiences as women here. So perhaps as men, we are lowering the bar and lowering expectations and saying, well, it's okay. Like Kevin Samuels said, well, women should have a hoe phase. And there's no reason for men to accept that, like ever. That no man has to accept that.
Right.
I know a guy who was just recently married. In fact, it was an arranged marriage. He's 28. He's an engineer. He has a great job. He told his parents he was ready for a wife, and they went through a friend of a friend of a friend, found the family. They had to send his picture for the daughter, who's 23, to look at it. And she's pursuing her MBA right now. And she liked his picture. They progressed. He saw hers. They spoke on the phone. He said, hey, I want to make sure your parents are not forcing you to do this. And she said, no, she's never dated a man, so she's a virgin. So this is happening still in the world, where men are marrying virgins who are, who they find attractive, intelligent, and they're prepared to be wives. And I'll just background, that's in India, but this guy lives here, and he'll be bringing his wife here. But men in the U.S. have been told that they should accept, we're supposed to accept women being 50 to 100 pounds overweight. We're supposed to accept women having multiple partners in a month, 50 to 100. And there are studies that show a woman who gets married as a virgin has a 90% success rate of her marriage. It's like over 90, it's about 95% success rate. Women who have one sexual partner and marry the second one also has like a slightly over 90% success rate in marriage. But once she gets to 3, it drops off into the low 80s. And when she gets to 6, the numbers drop significantly with each partner she has. So with 10 partners, there's like only a 50% chance of a successful marriage. And over 10, it drops. So if you take what I said before, 6 partners means 3 times, she's 3 times less likely to have an emotionally stable relationship. These women who are being promiscuous are bringing emotional instability to relationships, and no man should have to accept that. And this may be the reason why so many women are asking for divorce. And psychologists are also noting a phenomenon where women are all of us, for no reason, becoming enraged with their children. Like a 3-year-old spills milk. That's no surprise. But the mothers are just said they get into this uncontrollable rage with their 3-year-old for spilling milk. That I'm asserting this is part of this emotional instability from promiscuity. And men have to think about this, because if you want to have children, you are now going to have your children traumatized by a woman who's emotionally unstable.
I think that's what you said is true. Some will say that, you're right, that the numbers are not that statistically significant, but it remains true, and you're correct, and it makes a lot of sense, because women are containers, and when you are allowing yourself to be traumatized by dealing with multiple men, then what are you going to give your husband in the relationship? Right. What are you giving him? As I said before, Ted, earlier, that in fair exchange, there is no robbery. And women don't understand men are not wired to accept that. It's just not in our nature. We're not wired, because in our nature, we want to protect what we love and what we respect. But you can't respect something that's given itself to so many men, and then, you want full price. I've heard some guys say that if you've been over a certain amount of men, then, don't expect to get 100% of bills paid. We're going to prorate it based on the amount of dudes you've been with. And so they say proration is better because, they feel like they're expecting, the best of men, but they're not giving that man anything of virtue or value. And I'm a firm believer, Ted, that many times in relationships, because of the anxiety, I knew a lady, she was struggling with anxiety and depression, but she had been with a lot of men. I would probably say damn near 20 or more.
Exactly.
And she had multiple kids by multiple men. She was very unstable. And I do agree with what you're saying. It could be a possibility that the hormone receptors are burnt out. I call it oxytocin abuse, because,
exactly.
You were only meant to bond with one man for life, not multiple men. That's why, and then you think about these men putting their DNA inside these women. It's no wonder so many of them are mentally unstable, and they have a hard time being satisfied in a relationship, because what's there to look for if you're in a relationship where you've had a lot of fun? It's not to look forward to. What is there to look forward to? So a lot of guys are saying, the ones that have money, they're saying that, I'll take my chances and I'll get a woman from another country, or a woman that has not been imprinted by dusty men, because what women don't understand, that they can become imprinted. Sometimes when they're not even thinking about, they can be thinking about the man from the past. They can think about the music that played when she was having sex with that man in the past. And so no masculine man want to have the thought of a man doing all kinds of unscrupulous things with his future wife. That's why men ask the question. Now, some say a man shouldn't ask, because they say that, they believe that the woman's going to lie, or you can't handle it. What do you say about that, Ted? Should a man ask? And before you answer that question, let me give a special thank you for Andrew Baker. Thank you, Andrew Baker, for the $20 super sticker. Thank you, brother. Keep great information. Keep up the great work. Thank you. So what's your take on that, Ted? Should a man ask, especially, I would say a virgin definitely got to ask, but a man in general, because women ask about a man's financial past. And one of the things that women don't understand, Ted, is that in relationships, the sexes are not congruent. It's not, what she want, he don't necessarily want. But in relationship symmetry, men and women don't look for the same things. What men tend to look for is beauty, youthfulness, and chastity, and a woman that's feminine and she takes care of her body. But on the flip side, what a woman looks for is power, status, provision, protection, maintenance, security. So they don't look for the same things in the relationship. But what's your take on men? Should men ask about her past? What's your take on that?
Absolutely. Because, see, you're asking a man to commit to you for the rest of his life. And if you've been promiscuous and a man is educated about the effects of promiscuity on a woman's body and mind, he understands that you could be bringing a level of trauma, dysfunction, emotional instability into his life. And if you, as a man, you say, look, I'm inviting this woman into my life, you have a right to know who you are inviting into your life. You are, and maybe people won't like this, but as a man, you're being irresponsible if you haven't had these kinds of conversations with a woman. If it's just, the hookup culture, it doesn't matter. But if you're looking to take a woman serious and you want to have children with her, you have to think about her mental stability and what impact that's going to have on your children and preparing them for the world. And then what impact will her mental stability have on you? And you're not only on you mentally and physically, but on also your reputation in the marketplace, the business world. People may look at you as a poor decision maker. So absolutely, a man has a right to ask.
Right. And I think that, Ted, more or less coalesces with why relationships were a lot more stable. When you go to countries where they have very strong patriarchies, when you go to countries or continents like Africa where you pay a dowry for a wife, those women appear to be more stable. Now watch this. It doesn't mean that a woman that's a virgin won't go astray, but we're talking about the odds. We're talking about the odds. A woman that's a virgin or low bodies, the odds are more in her favor of infidelity versus a woman that have had partners from the past, because she gets very bored because her body is used to different men. Ted, I think the reason why so many women get bored in relationships now is due to undiagnosed sexual addictions, but also, Ted, because they get bored in relationships. What's your take on that?
I'm going to tell you, man, if a woman keeps going through that bond break cycle with too many different men, she's not going to properly secrete oxytocin. So being able to bond is difficult. So she's going to have to look for a substitute, which is dopamine, and she's going to need multiple partners to get a dopamine rush. And perhaps this is why 38% of marriages are sexless, because these women have been promiscuous and she's not getting an oxytocin rush with her husband. So she's getting nothing out of it. And she's going to get dopamine from having an affair and cheating, unless her husband is a criminal or something, and she's a hybristophiliac. I think it's just, I just question whether this is a sex addiction, because if it was sex addiction, you wouldn't have so many sexless marriages out there. I really think it has more to do with them creating malfunctions in their brain and the ability to secrete oxytocin so that they can bond properly with their spouse. And if they can't bond properly, they need other feel-good chemicals, and dopamine is one of them.
And I think that the women that have been damaged over time can bond, but it makes it a lot more challenging versus if they came in a relationship without being damaged at all. Shout out to my man, Karan S. Karan said that's another reason why. He said that's another reason why you never take an ex back. When she come back, she's bringing all those other men with her, and you're battling their energies. And I believe that sometimes, Ted, you dealt with women that got attitudes. And a lot of times, the woman that you're dealing with, or the attitude that you see the manifestation of that man's spirit inside of her. People don't believe that, sexual soul ties are real, but they are real. And, when a man, relationships in general, Ted, is hard work, but it's a lot harder when a man got to deal with a woman that's dealt with a lot of men, or she might see that man in the grocery store, she might see that man in her old college, and her body could tingle, or that woman could reminisce about that man from the past, and no man want to compete with the thoughts or compete with the ghosts of her sexual demons from the past or her sexual partners from the past, because men want to feel like that they're special and they don't want to compete with other men. But so many men, Ted, have such low self-esteem that they tend to tolerate disrespect and dysfunction. What's your take on that?
Yes, there are men in the United States have a reputation, and they will often say that the women in the U.S. wear the pants. Mm-hmm. So men accept bad behavior and make excuses for women. Oh, women have had it tough and they haven't had it fair, and so women are less happy now than they were in the 1970s. So right. Women are digging their own grave. They're cutting their own wrist by engaging in behaviors that go against their own biology. So, and I think what makes it worse is that men are tolerating it. And now women have a great appreciation for men who are masculine and put their foot down, not abusive, but they create boundaries.
Mhm.
And when women know that she's with a guy who's going to care for her and treat her well, and she has boundaries, and if you step outside of them, you're gone. When men keep lowering the bar to make women more comfortable, women
Right.
eventually resent that man
Right.
because now you don't have balls and I can do whatever I want, and she'll just keep pushing the boundaries further out and continue to resent you more and more. So she's not turned on by you at all. She's going to go look for, that's a woman who can easily have an affair. So men are going to have to embrace masculinity again. This whole notion of getting in touch with your feminine side, they started pushing that in the 70s. That didn't happen before. That's why you hear about your fathers and grandfathers and great grandfathers were, masculine men, and women really like that.
Very stoic.
Even women today say, "I wish men were more like my fathers and grandfathers."
Mhm.
They do appreciate that. But men have been told that it's toxic to be masculine, and you just need to ignore that and embrace your own divine biology.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Ted. You're 100% correct. And guys, go check Ted out on his YouTube channel at Ted Santos at youtube.com, where he talks about a myriad of different issues and topics. Tim dropped the link. This conversation is very important, Ted, because I believe that in order for heteronormative masculine men to get the outcomes that they want, that they cannot have their inner sanctum disturbed. I did a show, Ted, about 2 days ago talking about the inner sanctum of masculinity. And the inner sanctum of masculinity, Ted, is that holy place synonymous to, in the theology in the book of the Levites, or the Leviticus, which is that holy place that was synonymous to the holies of holies, or the Ark of the Covenant. And so that place was more or less fortified on strict standards and principles. And if those principles were violated, there were severe consequences. I believe, Ted, that men that are dealing with women that they can't really trust on an unconscious level are more or less violating and keeping their inner sanctum off key. And so when a man deals with a woman that has a sketchy past, then he really can't be his best because he can't trust her. He doesn't know that, if she's going to do something that's very unscrupulous. And many times, ladies, y'all think that cheating only means physical, but no. Cheating also means when you're dealing with exes, when you're talking to exes, when you're texting exes, that's a form of cheating as well. And that can impact a man in a negative way to the point that he'll lose a lot of respect for you. And so once you violate that and disrespect that man has a hard time viewing you the same again, because men tend to value that he deems special, and also what he deems to be bone of his bone, flesh of his flesh. Ted, I'm going to ask you another question. Why is sex so easy for the modern woman, and what role has social media played in the debacle of modern relationships, in your opinion?
You could say sex has always been easy for women, so that has nothing to do with social media. Like I said, in the late 60s and 70s, sex promiscuity was so widespread that even the highest socioeconomic class stopped. Marriage rates dropped. So this whole notion of sex being easy is not new. It's not social media. What social media has done is just given women access to a wider pool of men. That's all.
Right. And that's my point. My point is that social media is giving them an elevated ego. It's giving them a greater variety, a greater pool of men. But I think social media and technology has made it easier to do the things that are deviant, that was more or less shameful in the past. In the past, you didn't have as much access. Now, the access is at a quick, the click of a button. And so I agree with you about that as it relates to relationships. The women, Ted, that you've seen over the past that were more or less very promiscuous, when you look at their lives, what's some of the greatest indicators that you saw that perhaps that they were victims of a very promiscuous past?
Inability to deal with conflict.
So talk about that.
In any relationship, it's easy to have misunderstandings that can escalate and turn into conflict. But if you've been emotionally traumatized from promiscuity, and you're going to have anxiety, you're going to misinterpret things because you think you've seen so much and your view is accurate, but you just traumatize your own brain. So you tend to overreact and be defensive much more often, and it becomes more difficult to actually sit down and have a logical conversation. So when I look at women that I dated who had only one man before me, there was a lot more emotional stability in that relationship. It was easier to sit down and talk and talk things through than the woman who's had multiple men and feeling defensive and because see what you the thing that we often don't talk about is that a lot of times those women who are promiscuous have a low sense of self, so they're waiting for the other shoe to drop. And I've had women say that I'm just waiting for something to go wrong and you're just going to leave me, so they're always on the defense. They're dealing with anxiety much more than a woman who's had less, like one or two men.
What do you say to the critics, Ted, that say, well, sex impacts men and women the same? I don't think it impacts men and women the same. I think it can make a man very neurotic and impulsive, but I don't think it gives the man the level of emotional trauma that it does to the woman. What's your take on that?
In the studies where they looked at the correlation between women who were virgins and having successful marriages and women who were promiscuous having less successful marriages, they did the same study for men and they did not find a correlation.
What do you mean didn't find a correlation?
They didn't find that as men had more sexual partners, their ability to be married decreased.
Okay.
And there is, and I don't know how valid this is, that there's science that says the man's prostate is healthier if he's had sex with multiple women. I mean, if you had 1,000, there's a diminishing return, right? So there's such a thing as too many. And just want to make a quick comment on the microchimerism. I know a woman who has a master's degree in biology, and she's 28 years old. When she was doing her undergrad, she's the one who first told me that this microchimerism was an accidental find, and it's actually real. It's not pseudoscience. And I've asked her since she's been in grad school, and I said, "Is this pseudo? Is this?" And she said, "Nope. It's they're 100% sure." And the way they found it was a pregnant woman. They found DNA in her womb, and it wasn't the baby's, it wasn't hers, and it wasn't her husband's, and they didn't have other children. So then they went through all this trial and error and found that it came from men from her past. And so they've empirically found proof for this. But what you find is a lot of women are saying, well, it's not true and it's just pseudoscience. But that's just a way to keep telling women to stay out there. They have found the sperm of men, of a man in the past in the brain of several women. It's not 100%. I think that's like 50, 60 something % of women will have the sperm of a man from their past in the brain. So these things are happening, and I think we're just scratching the surface because all this is new. This whole notion of microchimerism is not like 50 years old. It's very new.
Right. A chimera is something that's a blend of something else. Like in the Greek mythology, they were called chimeras, like half goat, half human, half man,
right?
Or half eagle, half goat,
half horse, half man. Yeah,
right. That's a chimera. And let's say, and I believe the science makes sense because spermatozoa is like termites. All that don't come out, it goes into the bloodstream and it absorbs into the body. So a woman that has an IUD or some type of contraceptive device, say all the DNA that doesn't emit out of her vaginal tunnel, it goes into her body. So if she's having unprotected sex, you got the DNA of multiple men still swimming inside of you. And so these women say that they're the prize, they call average men peasants. Well, what is that man getting in return? He's not getting anything, Ted. He's getting a commodity that's been severely used, but yet she wants him to pay high price for it. And what men are saying, nah, the hell with it. Men are beginning to wake up. They're beginning to know what their worth is. They're not going to get caught up in shaming language, where some of these chicks try to shame them and say, my past is my past and you're judging me. Because watch this, everybody judge. Women judge. A man has a right to judge. It's one thing, Ted, called a judgment of condemnation, but there's another thing called a judgment of value clarification. Every man needs to judge a woman expeditiously based on his value system, no more than a woman should judge a man based on her value system. Women have value constructs. This base is tied into what she prefers. When she judged that man based on her value system, it leads into what she prefers from a man. Her value system might say he got to make a certain amount of money. Her value system might say that he needs to be a certain height. Her value system might say that he needs to be a man of high integrity. That's that woman's right to say that. Also, her value system might say that she don't want a man that's been with a man. But when it comes down, Ted, to men saying they have a value system, all of a sudden you're trying to judge me. It's always talked about from the negative angle of judgment, the judgment of condemnation versus the judgment of value clarification. And every man should have a right to say what they want in a woman if he's going to invest in that woman and make that woman his wife. Because you're correct. When you're dealing with women that have had a lot of fun from the past, you're dealing with a lot of emotional instability. You're dealing with women that are at a high risk of cheating. Because now her body's used to different men. She might get bored with you and she might not cheat on you physically, but she's cheating on you mentally when she's thinking about those men or texting those men. So it burns you up because your great-grandmom and your grandmother, Ted, they didn't have to deal with that. Women of modern time have had more sexual partners than their mothers and their great-grandmothers, or maybe their great-grandmothers and grandmothers years ago. Now, I know the sexual revolution, Ted, and you grew up around that time a little bit. Those women were getting in there too. But I think women now perhaps have been more promiscuous than the women of the 70s. What's your take on that?
No.
Okay.
70s, you all, it was out of control.
Okay.
I know a woman who graduated high school in 1976, 75, I think. And I asked her, and she went to Howard University. So I asked her, I said 1970s, mid 70s, that must have been still remnants of Black power and blah. And she said, no. She said it was all about free love. She said it was amazing how much sex but see, the difference now is women have been taught to hate men. So now it's like sleeping with the enemy. Back then, it was love, peace, love your brother, love one another, community, and they were all just having sex. So I can't say it enough. It was such a sexual revolution that it affected all socioeconomic classes. That is not happening now. All socioeconomic classes are not happening. But I want to add something else when you talk about judgment. And I forget the comment. Someone made a good comment about how men are judged by the woman you're with. So I'm an executive coach, and I work with a lot of CEOs, and I also work with men or people who want to become CEOs. And I've had clients who were vice presidents, never CEO, and I coached, I advised them, and they went on interviews, and they eventually got the job as a CEO. Well, as one of the interviews, they were going to be the successor to the existing CEO. So in one of the final interviews, he was told, the next interview, you need to bring your wife. And you and your wife are going to have dinner with me and my wife. And the decision of hiring this guy, the last and final decision, was going to be based on how his wife showed up. And if his wife showed up as obese or not great communication, not being able to resolve conflict, jumping to conclusions, anything that would have made him look like a poor decision maker, they would not have hired him. But his wife was and is a class act. So so doors can be closed on men who choose women who have chosen to be promiscuous and now are emotionally unstable because they never know who in the world sees them. And with social media and all these videos, people catch you doing stuff all the time. So yes, your wife is taking your last name. She reflects you.
Right.
And if you're choosing a wife who's just been out there, or a stripper, and you have to bring your wife to the next interview, and a guy who's interviewing you has seen your wife in a strip club, you're a poor decision maker now. So women who think, oh, you shouldn't judge me, no, your decisions affect my life in so many different ways. So
no, I totally agree with you. James Turner asked a very important question, and I've always posed it too. And here's my point. So James said, how much of an effect is on a woman if a man's wearing a condom? Does it have the same effect? I think if the man's wearing a condom, I think it plays a role. But I think if his essence inside of her, it definitely impacts her more versus a man wearing a condom. I don't think it impacts her as much, even though it does to some degree, maybe on an emotional level, and to some degree a spiritual level. But it's like a trifecta if he get his essence inside of her, because she's going to be carrying his DNA for life. And I've said before in the past that the woman is synonymous to the moon. She reflects the glory of the sun. And, that's why, in the past, it was an honor to, take on a man's last name and to see a man as your husband and as your king. Because, Ted, there's a great correlation on promiscuity and high divorce rates. You don't have as many high divorce rates now as you do back in the past prior to sexual revolution. What's your take on that?
Wait, say that again. You did not.
I said I don't think the divorce rates were as high prior to sexual revolution. Compared to now.
Yeah, that's another thing. So in 1968, California was the first state to have no-fault divorce. And once they instituted no-fault divorce, and I think it's in most of the states, the divorce rate, you actually watched it just go up on a chart like that. So once there was no fault, women jumped out. They jumped ship. But you were just saying something. What were you just saying? There was something I wanted to comment to something you just said.
I think we were talking about if a woman uses a condom versus
right. Yes. So in that book, Hooked. So yes, you're what you said about the sperm entering the man, that has a whole impact by itself. But what you have to understand is, for a woman to have sex, for her body to prepare to have sex, she's got to secrete a bunch of oxytocin to be turned on. And even if it's a one-night stand, she's going to secrete oxytocin, which has her bond. So if it's a one-night stand or six months long, she's going to bond with that man to have sex and then break. And then she's going to bond with a different man and break.
Right. It's not healthy, right?
Doing that, even if she has condoms for every single man, she's doing a bond break. And for a woman's brain, it eventually causes trauma. They did these neural imagings through 9 or 10 different states in the U.S., 46,000 people, and they had men and women in a room together, and they had all kinds of stuff hooked up to the brains for neural imaging, and they introduced the man and the woman at the same place to the same situation. And every time, the way women's brains work, women have more anxiety about the same situation. So women are already dealing with higher levels of anxiety, depression, insomnia, sleep disorders. And this is why women attempt suicide 3.45 times more than men, because their brains go through anxiety. If you add promiscuity to that, all it does is exacerbates what is already happening with women, that they're having anxiety, and now she's starting to be promiscuous and go through this bond break. A woman's like a thermometer. Like it's just too much. Her body and brain was not designed for that. So even with condoms, she's going to go through that bond break, and all it's going to do is increase depression, anxiety, and could lead to drug and alcohol. And in some cases, if there are too many men, it leads literally to mental illness. And that's why you see some of these women who are so angry. What the people are, their female friends around them are the same. So they think it's normal, and they're saying, well, you just can't handle it. But a lot of these women are undiagnosed with mental disorders.
Right. No, I totally agree. A lot of undiagnosed mental disorders. Women that have been through trauma, often, many times, especially the ones that have been traumatized through sexual abuse, have borderline personality disorders, and they use sex as a way to cover the pain because they want to feel whole. Guys, to the people that are listening, I need you guys to do this for me. Many times, guys, when you are actually signing on to the show, if you subscribe, you have to hit the notification bell, all. You have to hit the notification bell where it says all. If you just hit subscribe, you're not going to see the show when it comes on. So I need the 60 that are watching, hit the all button on your notifications, because the show comes on many times, and a lot of times you guys don't know. So once you guys do that, let me know. But in the meantime, I'm going to run this commercial real quick, and we're going to get back to the topic.
I'll be right back, man.
All right. Yeah, go ahead, Ted. Go ahead. Are you a victim of brokenness and despair? A broken man is a hopeless man, and a hopeless man is a very dangerous man. Many times, many of you young men that are listening come from homes that are very toxic and very dysfunctional. And because of that, many of you have deferred your power in many ways, to the point it's led over into your social life, and many times led over into your relationships. If you guys are dealing with mental health pathologies, conscious and unconscious, come see me at kosherclinician@gmail.com. That's kosherclinician@gmail.com. It's important that you deal with your mental health in order to be a better person for yourself, your loved ones, and also your community. But because mental health is often stigmatized, many of you often suffer in silence. Don't be a victim in silence. And see me once again at kosherclinician@gmail.com. And I need you guys to remember this. If it ain't 7, it ain't kosher. If it ain't kosher, it ain't right. There are 7 steps that a man must go through in order to become an optimized male. And male mental health is one of those elements that's paramount to the functioning of a man. Be well. All right, guys, while Ted is taking an intermission, we're going to continue this conversation. And what I need you guys to do is to hit the like button. If you guys have hit the all notification buttons, which is the bell, I need everybody that's listening to press 1. I need to see 52 people press 1 if you guys have hit the all notification bell. We got a great show on tonight. I'm going to drop the link in a few minutes, and I'm going to have continue this discussion. But if you guys have more or less like what I'm doing, if you guys enjoy the show, hit the 1 for the all notification button as we continue to have this discussion about, does sexual addiction increase the rate of or reduces the rate of wife readiness? Now, Ted, hold tight. We're back, and we're going to finish this conversation, Ted, because this has been a great conversation. Do you think, Ted, that a woman that is a sexual, a person that's dealing with sexual addiction, do you think she can recover? And if she can recover, do you think it takes a long time for her to go do the shadow work to deal with the demons from her past?
So I would say you'd first have to make a distinction. So let's say there are women who have sexual addictions. And if she has a sexual addiction and gets married, that sexual addiction will stay in place. People use words like nymphomaniac. But there are women who have emotionally traumatized their brain, not because they had sexual addictions, they were promiscuous. It was this I can do whatever a man can do, and I can be in control of a man. And when those women get married, there's a good chance that they've done that bond break so much that they end up in a sexless marriage because they don't want to have sex. They were never sexually addicted. And so that's another reason why a man should know a woman's numbers, because if she's been with too many men, she could easily not want to have sex with her husband because she's not having that oxytocin secretion, and she's not bonding with him.
That's a good
She
point.
needs a dopamine rush, which makes her no different than a drug addict.
Mm-hmm.
So to get her dopamine rush, she's going to need him to either spend money, buy gifts. She's going to want to cheat. She's going to want to do something to get dopamine, and it doesn't necessarily have to come from sex. She may actually even hate having sex. What she used sex in her single life as a way of feeling like she was in control, controlling men. And she'll get a dopamine rush because she feels like she's in control, but it's really not about the act of sex itself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's an excellent point. I never thought of it that way. Excellent breakdown, Ted, and excellent expose, because you're correct. Dopamine is synonymous to the word dope. That's where the word dope came from,
Exactly.
because it impacts the neurotransmitters in the brain. And many times, if her body's used to a certain type of man, she used to men, they were football players and they were big and burly and masculine. And, and he made her body feel a certain way, and then she get with a guy that's average. You're right. She could get bored, or she could be lusting and thinking about the man that she had sex with from the past, which in essence can impede her ability to be wife ready. Women of the past, Ted, they only knew a man that had an average sized penis. They were grateful for that because that's all they knew. But now so many women, Ted, have been dealing with so many men that an average man is not enough. They'll tell you straight up, if you're not packing, I can't deal with you. What's your take on that?
Well, there are a lot of women who don't like sex, man.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think that's the case, Ted? You think it's due to unresolved trauma?
Well, like I said, I lived in Latin America. They're not having those problems. The women are not having those problems there. And so they've been through the same kind of trauma that women here have been through. So I'm not buying that. So what women have, so we have two problems in the US. One, the US was founded on a Puritan culture, which is very very constraining. We've never gotten rid of the whole Puritan culture that's been a foundation of United States culture. So when you go to the Caribbean, where Puritan culture is not part of it, they have more sexual freedom there, whether the woman's promiscuous or not. And you may find the same thing if you go to Europe, like especially France. Hell, I've dated women from the Middle East who were much more free and open than a woman who has, let's just say here in the U.S. And there are lots of women in the U.S. who are healthy sexual. But there's another aspect is women have been taught that men are subjugating them, that men want to control and dominate you. And so sex is just another form of a man controlling and dominating you. So for a woman to take sex away from a man, it's a way for her now to believe that she's controlling and dominating the man, as opposed to being. So she may not like sex because, one, her attitude towards men is negative, her attitude towards sex, and she may have had some negative sexual experiences as a child, and they're unresolved. But just the culture in general, I mean, I lived in some obscure places, and it was interesting to see that the women had much healthier attitudes towards sex than you have here in the U.S. And I'm telling you, the foundation of our culture across the board, not just sex, is Puritans. And the Puritans were kicked out of England because they were so suppressive, and they brought that same suppressiveness here. And we've never gutted that out and started from scratch.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You're correct. That's an excellent point, brother. Excellent point. Shout out to my man Yaziz with the $5 super sticker. He said reprobate means unapproved, rejected by implication, worthless, literally or morally. We are now dealing with reprobates. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, Yaziz. I agree with you 100%. I think a lot of the women that men are dealing with now are damaged, some beyond repair. It would take a greater work of God, something supernatural, to be the repair of the breach. And even with that, they would have to work to satiate the ravages of carnal flesh. So that's an excellent point. Thank you, Yaziz, for the $5 super sticker. Also, shout out to my man, Mr. Albert. He said, do you think all these women toys that women use have affected them in the long run? I think so. Ted, what's your take on it?
Yeah, that would, yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So how do you think, like vibrators and stuff play a role in, causing a woman to become a sex addict? Because I do believe that women that have an overstimulation of using toys, many times she can't even get off because her button has been desensitized by toys. And, when a man tries to have sex with her, it's really not a big deal. What's your take on it?
Yeah, and she may be using toys that are much bigger than the average man. And so an average guy is going to have, she may say that's not doing it. So, but yeah, I mean, just having access to their toys all the time. Yeah.
Ted, why do you think, well, let me ask you this question. Do you think our women were compromised by liberal policies? It could be argued, Ted, that at one point that Black women or women of color were some of the most conservative women when it came down to behavior. What's your take on that? And do you feel like our women have been compromised through liberal policies, in your opinion?
Well, so this is going to sound counterintuitive. I think Black women still are conservative when it comes to having intimate conversations about sex, or even just relationships about herself in general. A lot of Black women will be like, well, you ask a lot of questions, or, why do you need to know that? Like even asking, what are your numbers, right? So there's this defensiveness.
Right.
So they are still conservative in that sense. And I want to answer your question. So yes, there's these liberal policies. I know this guy. He must have been born in late 40s, early 50s, and he said his parents his parents have only been married to one another. He has somewhere between 8 and 10 siblings, and his mother told him that, and he said his mother has breasts that are, she's well endowed, that even though they have all those children, his father has never seen his mother's breast. And his mother said, well, that wouldn't be right. So that's just to point out how conservative Black women, you're married to a man, you have 10 children, and he's never seen you fully nude. That's pretty conservative. Yes.
That's crazy.
That's very conservative, right? So now, we have women who just get up on a stage and dance for money, right? So that's the whole opposite end of the spectrum. So we've gotten out of control. So you could say liberal politics, but I think perhaps the most liberal in the equation is one you didn't ask about, and it's Black men that are too liberal.
Interesting. Ted, when you think, I'm sorry, go ahead, brother. Go ahead.
They accept certain things and say, well, you shouldn't judge her, and we all have mothers, and Black men won't judge their women the way a Middle Eastern men will judge their women.
Right. They're a lot more severe, right? I think men in other cultures are a lot more severe because those cultures are patriarchies, and they tend to have more intact family where the men are dominant. But now, Ted, you don't have that anymore. You don't have the intactness that you had before in the past. You have a very fledgling matriarchy that's mostly led by women, and women that tend to dictate the men what's masculine and what they should accept. But I did a show, Ted, before in the past called that the man is the prize catcher. He determines if she's wife worthy or wife or more or less worthy to be his wife. But now so many times, Ted, you got these women that are very arrogant. They can be 500 pounds. They can have kids by multiple men, and they come to the table thinking that they're better. They call the man a peasant. They call him a bum. But there was a time, Ted, when I was in high school, if a woman had kids, she was a pariah in the community. Do you remember that time? Because I know I remember. I came out of high school in 90. If a woman had children or children by multiple men, she was a pariah in the community, and the men didn't take her serious. And also, there was a time, Ted, that women that were very obese, they were very humble. Now you got chicks that are obese that think that they are the prize. What's your take on that?
Yes. So women with children, while there were men who would marry them, but there was shame. You shamed your family, for one. For two, just think of what you were saying earlier, that a woman's virtue being a virgin, right? So your family did a good job in making sure you remained a virgin before you met your husband, right?
Right.
But if you have children, you are now a liability. You now have an extra expense for a man in terms of money and time that will be taken away from his seed, that's a liability. So men of quality would not take women who had children already. And it's interesting you're saying, but women are saying, well, I'm a package deal. You have to take my children. And men are like, no, you're just practice. You're target practice, and that's it. And women who are overweight, that's out of control. That's a whole nother health issue. I had a woman inbox me. She's 5'6", 270 pounds. And I said, I can't do that. She's like, why? I'm giving you everything on a silver platter. And I'm like, I like women who are physically fit. You're not physically fit. Like that's it. And she's like, well, I never had a man turn me down. I just don't do girls like that. So women get offended.
And that's the problem. She never had men to turn her down. But on the flip side, Ted, many times they'll judge you for being like, you're 5'7", 5'6". They'll judge you for being short, or they'll judge you for how much money you make. But at the same time, when men have standards, then all of a sudden it's a problem. To the 5th, 8th that are watching, thank you guys for watching. Get the likes up. I need you guys to get the likes up. You guys have done an awesome job. It should be 100 people on this stream tonight. I got Ted Santos of Ted Santos Straight Talk. Him and I have done several collaborations in the past. Ted is an intellectual, in my opinion. He's like a professor. And if you're not an intellectual, then you're not going to understand what he's talking about. But this stream should have at least 100 people. So I need you guys to share this show, share with some people as we're having this conversation, because it's a presumption that women that have sexual addictions or the undiagnosed sexual addictions are not willing or more or less wife ready. Ted Santos, when you think about Cardi B, what nouns or adjectives come to mind when you think about Cardi B and the impact that she's had on traditional relationships?
So my first thought is I don't think about Cardi B. So, when I've done my shows and guys talk about women who kind of act like Cardi B, this is the way I look at it. I'm not concerned about women who are crackheads and heroin addicts or alcoholics. They don't show up on my radar. And so a woman like Cardi B is just a notch up from a crackhead prostitute. And maybe that's the route that men need to start going, is just ignoring these women and not giving them attention, don't give them money. If men start backing off of OnlyFans and what did they say, gassing these women up, if you stop doing that, these women will be humbled in a heartbeat. So the adjective I have for Cardi B is she's irrelevant.
What damage, if any, Ted, do you think Cardi B has had
a lot
on the psyche of these young girls? And do you think it's led our girls to have overinflated egos and not be wife ready, in your opinion?
So, two things. If you see Cardi B with no makeup, she doesn't look, anywhere near like you see when she's picture ready. But the idea of her music and the things that she says. But see, here's the paradox. She talks all of that, except she is, I don't know if she's still married, but she's a married woman.
Mhm.
So she's technically not practicing what she preaches.
That's a good point. That's an excellent point, because just like Beyonce has a husband.
Exactly.
She got a family, but
Right.
it's like they're teaching girls to be promiscuous and exhibit
Exactly.
promiscuity and be promiscuous, where they have families, they have children, and it appears that it's more or less propaganda, and many of our women have failed for the propaganda because
Exactly.
they are rebellious, and many don't want to be led by a strong and a masculine man. I would more or less surmise, Ted, that if many modern women saw a masculine man, they would confuse it with toxic masculinity. Many would say that Jesus was a misogynist and say that he was practicing toxic masculinity. He was the kindest man in the world. But it's the issues that we're dealing with in this society, Ted, and I don't see it dissipating at no other time. I'm going to drop the link in a minute, Ted, and then we're going to sign off in a minute. This has been an excellent discussion as we're talking about does sexual addictions reduce the chances of wife readiness? And I would say unequivocally, yes. I think it does reduces the woman's ability to be wife ready because her body has been impacted. And Ted, you made a very powerful point. What you said more or less ties to theology. You said something that's very powerful. The gospel says that when a woman leaves her husband, her father, and the woman shall cleave unto her husband, they will become one flesh. So they're being bonded through sex.
Right.
They're being bonded through emotions, and they're being bonded through love. And I would more or less pose that the Bible's before its time, Ted, as it relates to sexuality. The gospel even said that when a woman in the book of Leviticus had sex with a man that wasn't her husband, she was deemed to be unclean. And she was being deemed to be unclean because many times the excrements of that man's essence went inside of her. And so the covenant was that she had to be a virgin, which means that she was ready to be under the umbrella of her husband. But now, Ted, if you notice women, when you were in high school, women that had low body counts, Ted, were very clingy. Think about it. They were a lot more clingy, Ted, the ones that only had like one partner or didn't have a lot of men. But women that have had a lot of men, then they're not as clingy because, it goes back to our theory or truth of oxytocin burnout. Pair up, break apart, pair up, break apart, pair up, break apart. That's why divorce, Ted, many times hurts so bad because now they're bonded, and it's trauma. It's trauma when you pair with somebody, and then you tear them apart, and then she get with another man. She pairs with him, and she tears them apart. But as she continues to do it, Ted, it's almost like the law of diminishing return. By the time she keep pairing, break apart, pair, break apart, pair, break apart, then after a while it becomes irrelevant. No different than when a woman saw her child being torn away from her bosom during slavery. It was very trauma-inducing. Right. And so that's why these conversations are so important, because I think women forgot to ask men what they want. They for so long have told men what they should accept. But I did a show in the past called Taxation Without Representation, Ted, and the mental breaking of the American male. And Ted, there's a silent coup that's going on in these YouTube streets where men are beginning to wake up, and conversations like what you and I are having are letting men know that they do have inherent worth. They have a right to more or less demand power in relationships and to get the outcomes that they want if they want that man to more or less put the ring on their finger. Ted, at one point, the ring symbolized a lot of things. The ring symbolized security, it symbolized honor. But now many see the ring as nothing. Many times in modern America, a woman can get married 5 times and she don't think nothing about the ceremonial duties of marriage. What's your take on that?
So if you want to look at the Bible and look at it from a religious perspective, if you marry a divorced woman, you're committing adultery. So you technically, yes, the woman could get married and marry someone else, but she is that's a dirty woman.
Right.
she's used goods, and in the eyes of the 10 Commandments, there's a commandment that says, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." She's divorced. Any man who marries her is now an adulteress. So any married woman who says, "I want a God-fearing man," should understand once she divorces, that any man that marries her, she's inviting a man to commit adultery.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I agree, especially with the no-fault divorce clause, because there's nowhere in the Bible that says no-fault divorce. That's a secular mandate, but you can't be a woman of God and be a participant in no-fault divorce. Old things just didn't work out, or no, you can't do that, man. You can't do it.
Well,
And
I'm not feeling him anymore.
right, I'm not feeling him anymore.
I'm not
right.
excited. It's not. It's we don't. I don't feel the connection. That's like that's not a marriage. That was never a marriage to start. Then.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Ted, I think that's why you're seeing so many men begin to become apathetic. There's a saying that says that the opposite of hate is indifference, and many men are beginning to become indifferent. How are you seeing indifference, Ted, when you look at society? When you live in New Jersey, are you beginning to see men check out in relationships and become indifferent based on anecdotal evidence from your estimation, Ted?
Not if you go out into New York. You don't. You see lots of activity between men and women. What I'm noticing from women, it seems to be a higher receptivity. So I'm under the assumption that, and maybe it's part of the pandemic, but the assumption is that women are not being approached as much as they used to be, and you hear it. I've seen YouTube videos of women complaining that why don't men approach us anymore? So between social media, you hear it a lot. But I'm if the Hudson River wasn't there, I could literally walk to Manhattan. So I'm very close there to that. So I'm there often,
right?
And you just still see a lot of interaction. I think about in the gym, the way guys talk in the gym. So men are still engaging women, but there is more caution, and so there is some indifference, but they're still engaging them with an understanding that they may not be getting what they want from the woman.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally agree, man. I think that's why it's so important for men to begin to start having standards again. I think standards are very important. We're going to drop the link for a few minutes, guys. We're going to allow you guys to come up and have a brief conversation with Ted and I. Because Ted, listen, you and I didn't get this free game when we were young men growing up. We had to figure out on our own. Now, we did have elders, that were more or less erudite and more stronger back in the past. But a lot of the young generation or the Gen Xers, we didn't get the free game that you and I are giving on tonight. And Ted, you make some very powerful points, very powerful angles I didn't even look at. Some of it, made a lot of sense about the dopamine rush and, using the dopamine rush to more or less assuage what she missed from sex from her past. That was very profound, very profound. So I'm going to drop the link, guys. Let's have a conversation. Guys, I need you guys to get the likes up. If you have not donated, donate to Cash Out $7 Smalls. Tim dropped the link for my man Ted. Go check out Ted Santos at Ted Santos on YouTube. He'll be having some very provocative conversations. He's a lot calmer than he was in the past,
What's going on, Red Pill Awareness? Good to see you in the house, man. What's up?
But Ted is a good brother, man. So the link has been dropped. Ladies, if you want to come up, you can ask questions. We're not going to attack you. We know that there are women in this space that are trying to learn. They're trying to understand men and why men think the way that they think. And so, ladies, we are not going to attack you. We're going to allow you ladies to more or less talk and more or less give clarity to what's going on. And I appreciate it. Shout out to my man, Anthony Lewis. He said, can sexual addictions reduce wife readiness? Yes. Thank you, brother, for the $10 cash out. You're 100% correct, Anthony Lewis. Yes, it can reduce wife readiness because she was only created to be with only one man, ideally. But we live in a very modern time, in a very modern world. And I would say, Ted, that if some of these women's, the modern women, grandmothers and great-grandmothers can come back, they will be appalled at the level of promiscuity that many modern women are more or less exhibiting on stage now, in my opinion. So, so guys, the link has been dropped. You guys can pop in. Let's have a discussion.
Yeah, Barry Hamilton, that was a good comment. Me Too movement might play a part in this cause caution and mistrust between the genders. Yeah, that even before the pandemic, Me Too was making men just back off.
No, I totally agree. Guys, pop in for conversation. Thank you, Tim, for dropping the link. Go check out Ted Santos on YouTube because Ted has some very provocative conversations as it relates to relationships and men. Ted and I have been more or less collaborating for years. Ted started this journey before me, and we've been collaborating ever since. A good brother, you know, and him and I always have. We started the Manhood Chronicles. I started the Manhood Chronicles, and Ted was one of my featured guests, him and Blair Nash, and we've been going strong ever since. Ted, do you still do Blog Talk Radio?
I do. I took a bit of a break. I haven't done it in a week right now, but yes, yes.
What is the epigenesis, Ted, of Blog Talk Radio? What is that all about?
It was straight talk. It was a show that's made for men by men, and so a place where men. So as you said earlier, women have been defining manhood and talking about what real men do and what it means to be a real man and what a man's role is and what he shouldn't do. and as you said, women never asked men what they wanted. So I created a platform so that men could talk like men, which means if we wanted to be confrontational with one another, if we wanted to have a really serious conversation, or we wanted to have an intimate, vulnerable conversation, we could do it as men without being told by women how we're supposed to think and feel and speak. Now, if women wanted to see how men are in their sort of natural habitat, it's a show made for men by men, except no woman would want to miss it because you get to see men and hear men talk about what they really want without influence of a woman.
And I know you and Blair started Straight Talk. You guys were doing it
we did
exclusively back in the past. So the link has been dropped. James Turner, if you want to come on, you don't have to cam up. I know you, brother. I normally ask others to cam up, but James, you can pop in and you can ask Ted a question. And we're going to sign off in a few minutes. This has been one for the books. I really appreciate everything that you guys do. You don't know what it means to me to do what you guys do. These shows are very time consuming. It's a lot of work being a one-man show, bringing great guests like Ted Santos on that always bring clarity and intellectual appeal to the topic at hand. To the ladies that are watching, I appreciate your level of maturity because I know that some of you want to learn. I really appreciate the women that are trying to learn and listen because if you want to get a man, you know, the men are giving the answers to the test. You know, you don't have to walk around, drooling like somebody in special education.
Right.
Write the answers down. We're giving the answers to the test. Only you got to do is write the answers down, be genuine, don't be fake, and adhere to it. And you're right. This stream should at least have 100 people watching at some point. It makes me angry to some degree that when you have brilliance like yourself and myself, I'm dropping gems for the masses. It's almost like, Ted, that salaciousness sells over intellectual conversation and intellectual appeal, which in my mind burns me up, but such is life in modern America. James Turner, how you doing, sir? How would you like to add to the conversation?
Hey, how you guys? Can you guys hear me?
Yes,
loud and clear. How are you, man?
All right. Hey, Ted, first of all, man, thanks for entering the show, and you giving a lot of good information, brother. I appreciate it.
Hey, thank you.
Hey, listen, just a quick question. Of course, this is part of my naivete. How can you distinguish a woman who's just simply wanting attention? Because for the most part, when women are dressing provocatively or acting a certain way or something like that, a lot of times they're just, seeking attention, male attention and not really getting it, versus a woman who is, who has a negative pathology or is dealing with some sort of mental or even sexual trauma, or is there a difference? Is my question is my question clear, or am I vague?
It is. Seven. I did a show once, and I had a woman who was a sex worker, 27 years old. She stands 6'1", and she did OnlyFans. She did the whatever the video thing is, and she also was being paid as a dominatrix. But here's the catch to all of that: she was a virgin. So
Wow.
she did get male attention, but she actually never had sexual intercourse, even though she did create like the dildo on a cam. That's it, the word I was looking for, cam. But she actually never had been, sexually touched. She'd been kissing a man before. So there are women like that, and I think social media can create confusion for women because when I was speaking to her, she's 27, but at 19 is where she learned that there are men out there who will give you a monthly salary for being their girlfriend. And some of them may want to have sex, some don't. So there are all these things going around about women and the easy path for them to get. So at 19, her hearing that, it piqued her interest, and she wanted to explore that. So I think women are getting this information; they're being misdirected. And so your question is, how do you tell the difference? You really do have to dig in there and get questions, asking them questions. But also, this woman I'm talking about, she wasn't a very defensive woman.
Mhm.
One of the things that I find in women who are like promiscuous is they can be very defensive, especially when you start talking about their sexual history. Even though they say numbers don't matter, but they get defensive. It doesn't matter, then you should be able to tell me you've been with 10, 50,
Right.
100, right? If it
Yes.
doesn't matter,
Yes.
you wouldn't
Mhm.
be defensive about it. So that's one place to look, is how they get defensive when you start talking about sex. And yes, there are a lot of women who are being getting this. Hell, they're even getting, you could say, a dopamine rush from the attention they get from the likes, whether doing cams or OnlyFans. It's unfortunate that we're creating this kind of culture where women are getting rewarded for bringing like no real value except their bodies.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That makes sense. That makes total sense.
Did I
Okay.
answer your question, brother?
It did, man. I appreciate that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I know you always got those very intellectual queries.
Stop.
Call you to
Stop it.
Call you to scale
Stop it.
balance.
Stop it.
Good
All right.
question, man. But I think that's a question a lot of men need to be asking, especially with social media. So good question.
Yeah, I figured I'd get on out here and put myself on out there, and hey, however it comes back is how it comes back. If I don't ask it, somebody else may not, feel empowered to do so. So I figure I would.
Right.
And really quick, in regard to social media, would you say that this whole sexual thing? Well, I think you kind of answered it, but I'll ask the question anyway. Back in the day, there was no access to sexual media and or internet, as far as we know is concerned. As far as we know, how did that have anything to do with now this whole this more sexual promiscuity that women are having, or has it always been there regardless of the social media? I think I heard you say that with the experiences that, or should I say the pathologies that women are having, it really has uh, uh, social media really has no bearing on that. Is that correct?
You could say it intensified it, but let me tell you, in the 70s, man,
Mhm.
guys would walk up to women and just ask, "Would you like to go home with me?
That's right.
What's your zodiac sign?"
Right.
People don't realize how promiscuous they were back then.
Yeah. Very true.
And
Very
it was, you didn't have this acrimonious relationship between men and women. So there was more of a, love, peace, joy, free love. So you'd ask a woman, do you want to go home with me? Or, hey, look, would you like to go have breakfast with me? Which was code word. Would you like to go home and have sex with me? And a woman would look you up and down and make a decision, like on a fly, yes or no.
That's right. That's true.
So I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but I'm saying, man, like people were having sex in nightclubs, man, on a dance floor or behind the speakers. Like it was free love was just, these are maybe the children and grandchildren of those people. So you in some ways you can't be surprised, man.
And again, as far as the men are concerned, the best thing that we can do again is to level up when it comes to our standards.
Right.
Really, really vetting our women, at least the women, or should I say, the women that we are interested in, and get as much of the truth as I possibly can out of them. Understanding that in some ways that they may not be.
Good luck.
Yeah, right. They may not be that right. But then you said but then you gave a very, very good point by saying that, when and if they become defensive, and I kind of have a way of bringing that out of some people in some ways. The minute that they become defensive, then I know that they're holding something back in relation to the question that I asked or whatever. So
they have to hide something. Right?
Yep.
And that may be, I'm not saying like it's a fact, but it may be pointing to some emotional instability, because to become upset and defensive over questions that are really valid for a man to be able to ask, especially if they're asking you to be a traditional man. Right. So I have a right. Then are you a traditional woman? Are you a virgin? And how many men have you been with? If you want me to finance a relationship, because that's what it's about. As a man, we're financing relationships.
That's a fact.
You're asking me to invest in you. So what am I investing in? I need to understand who you are and where you've been. And if you don't believe I have a right to know that, yet I'm investing. If I invest in stocks in the stock market, I have a right to do due diligence and know everything I want to know about that company, including calling them and asking questions, because I'm a potential investor. So the same thing with a woman. A man has a right. This is an investment of my time that I don't get back.
Very true. Okay. I think that's all I have for right now. Thanks so much, brother.
Hey, no, thank you, man.
No doubt, no doubt. And you know what the crazy thing is, Ted, real quick, any other institution that you deal with, whether it's the bank, whether it's high schools, whether it's colleges, whether it's any program, they're going to always ask you about your past, because they're going to invest in you.
Exactly.
When you go to a Ivy League school, I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, the greatest state in the union, the greatest state in the union, the greatest college in the union. No cap, having fun. And,
if you say so.
Look at that hater over there.
He's never been to New Jersey, but keep going, man.
look at that hater. But my point is, man, institutions ask about your SAT score. Financial institutions ask about your credit score. Banks ask about, how much money are you making? But in my mind, being invested with a woman for the rest of your life carries a greater impact than all of those three.
Exactly.
But for some reason, when it comes down to relationships, people say you don't have a right to ask. And it's the dumbest thing in the world, because if you build a house, you're going to get a house inspector to make sure that house doesn't have termites. But when a man wants to be in a relationship long-term with a woman, somehow they say you shouldn't ask, and that doesn't make any sense to me, because if you're afraid to ask, that lets me know right away that you think there's something about her past that she don't want to discuss. And every man got a right to know whether she tell you the truth or not. And she can always say, well, I don't feel comfortable discussing my past. And then at that point, that's an exit to move on, and she don't have to tell you anything. But if you decide to make her your wife, then you have a right to know that because you don't know how she was impacted from the past.
Exactly.
Liberal policies will say, well, it's none of his business and that feminist rhetoric, but no, it is his business because she's going to ask you about your financial past. She's going to ask you, have you ever dealt with children? She's going to ask you about things from your past, and she has a right to ask you about your past if she's going to be your wife. But you have an equal right to ask her about her past as well. Yaziz, real quick, brother, how would you like to add to the conversation before we sign off?
Let me add one thing to what you just said, because you said something about men being called toxic masculinity, and so what I would encourage men to do is embrace that. So if a woman says you're being controlling and you're asking me all these questions, you're being toxic masculinity, say yes, I am. And if you're looking at a man who's not masculine, then that's not me.
Right.
And I promise you, she's going to make a decision on the spot, and she's going to understand. You just put boundaries in place, and you didn't kowtow and back down. The more you back down from her, the more she's going to keep forcing you to back down until she resents you.
Aziz, how would you like to answer the conversation, brother? How you doing, sir?
Man, I'm wonderful. First of all, I got to give all honors and thanks, definitely to you, Kosher, for having this platform.
No doubt.
And definitely for putting elders like El Wapo and Ted on here, because a lot of men, we don't have an opportunity to hear the voices of the elders, and that the voices of the elders, they're our library today.
Right.
Those are the voices that if you go 20 years down the road, we're not going to have access to.
That's true.
So the fact that we're getting it right now, we're getting y'all's experience in our present day, and just while we downloading this information, it's becoming a part of our own experience that we can actually share this wisdom, and we can say, hey, our Kosher had a show, and he had a brother named Ted on there, and they were going in on this information, and this is kind of like creating that fire in the mind, that excitement, and I really want to give thanks for that, man. This is amazing.
Yes, sir. Before the record, I'm not an elder. Ted and James Turner are elders. I'm too. I got
comment on that.
Watch it, brother. Watch it. Watch it. Watch it.
I got too much swag to be an elder. That when I get 90 years old, I'm
you got the swag. Don't mean you ain't old, brother.
I got that Leo swag, man. I'm an immortal.
Because you can't.
Go
ahead, Yaziz. I'm having fun, man. Go ahead, brother.
But it's interesting. What we speak on, and number one, we're advocate for men in these spaces, and one thing to be advocate for men is also to see also where, like, for instance, the scarcity of sex amongst the younger generation nowadays. Like, I've noticed that most men in their 30s or younger, not all men, but most men, there's a scarcity as far as sexual options, right? And that scarcity in the face of OF, OnlyFans, and all of that, do you think that also the scarcity in men and the increase in the desire and wanting sex is creating a deeper whorish culture and creating more whoremongering from men? Is actually contributing to the issue. It's inflating the issues that men are dealing with women because of their own desperation.
That's a good question. Taylor, let you take it. Go ahead, brother.
So I went to college in the early 80s, and I grew up in New Jersey and went to college in DC. And when I went into DC, I saw what you just talked about. Like, there was there appeared, as an outsider coming into DC, it appeared that women were withholding sex from men, and there was this scarcity. And as a result of the scarcity, I saw men say things to women walking down the street that I had never seen in Jersey or New York. So it appears when women withhold sex from men, and you are right. Right now, we have more virgin men under 30 than the history of the U.S.
Right.
It is having another effect, right? So it's creating some other phenomena in our society, and that is a problem. So what I saw, that scarcity by men, in DC, that's where I first saw like this extreme power that women had, knowing that by them withholding sex and creating scarcity, they had a little bit more power and leverage over men. And there was a little more desperation from men. And it just created this game where women could actually demand more because they made sex scarce. Am I answering your question?
No, you definitely answered the question. And the reason why this is very important to get that point of view, and have us understand that point of view is that I know the main thing that Kosher always expresses is that men need to travel more. Right. Because I know you probably can expound on your experience of when you go into other foreign lands, whereas men, sex is not really a scarcity. It's right. Almost to a point to where the language of abuse, the women can actually cry. Like, well, for instance, you said something earlier that was very interesting, where you stated that more men are sexually abused in this society at a younger age than women are, but in the other countries, it's more women. And I've noticed that to be true, because when I've seen violence between men and women, and I've seen abuses and stabbing, a lot of times it's in relationships where the women are actually doing this to men over here, and it's not the men doing it to the women.
Right.
And this is from my own witness, and it's not one person. This is like if I was to take a group of men that I know, about 20 of them, I can name 8.
Well, according to Harvard Medical School and NIH, National Institute of Health, 70% of domestic violence is initiated by women, not men. 7.
Right, 7%.
7
right.
0.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
Powerful statistic there. That's deep.
Right. It's yeah. And when I tell it to people, they don't believe it. Like, they initiate. The man might do the visceral damage after the fact, but they're the ones that initiate the domestic abuse.
Right. She gets beat up for starting a fight and then plays victim. But we don't hear the whole story that she actually went after him, and she didn't stop, and he defended himself and shut it down.
Mm-hmm.
And so men don't report a lot of it. But even when they do, even some of the police think it's a joke.
Mm.
Right, they do think it's a joke, and it's unfortunate, because abuse to no one should never be tolerated. It should never be tolerated.
Yep.
Not tolerated at all. Listen, guys, it's about 4 minutes after the hour, 11 o'clock. We're bringing to you live once again from the greatest state in the Union, the Tar Heel State. We're gonna sign off in a minute, but before we sign off, did any of the ladies want to pop on to ask Ted or I a question? And if not, we're gonna sign off. This has been a good show. But before we sign off, Ted, starting with you, what did you get from this show and the current hedonistic culture that we live in, brother, real quick?
So what I've gotten is that, and I'm reading the chats and hearing that there's a lot of information about what's actually happening, especially with women sexually, that is not widely known. And if men had greater access to that information, it would help them in making decisions for choosing an appropriate spouse.
Right. Where do we go from here, Ted Santos? Where do we go from here?
So men are going to have to educate themselves. Listen, even though I lived in several countries, there's some value in finding a wife abroad. There can be a problem bringing her back, because she'll eventually be indoctrinated here. So really, men are going to have to say, here's where the bar is. This is the standard. And if you don't meet that, you're not wife material. Period. There's no way around it. And if they say, well, you're just trying to control my body, my choice. Yes, it is your body, your choice. You can do whatever you want. There are consequences for whatever you do. There are consequences. And as men, we're not going to deal with these emotionally unstable women. We understand that you bring a level of emotional instability just by being a woman and having your menstrual cycle and being pregnant. But you haven't learned properly what happens when you're promiscuous, and I'm not going to inherit your problems and have you even abuse my children. So as a men, This is unacceptable. So, and if you look at Middle Eastern people that live here, men have that kind of attitude towards their women, even their daughters. And that's the other thing. Men have to stop telling their daughters that men are horrible and telling their daughters they don't need a man. So because you're setting your wife, your daughter up to be the cat woman. She'll be undesirable for men. So as fathers, men have to really take that stand and help their daughters understand they're being lied to. And as someone used the feminist trap, feminism is a trap and it's a dead end.
Mm-hmm. No doubt, Ted. That was a great expose. Thank you, Ted. I appreciate that. I really do. James Turner, what did you get from this conversation, man? As we're about to sign off, what did you get from this conversation?
Yeah, I definitely mimic what Ted had to say in regard to knowing now a little bit more about how important sex is, when it comes to relationship with women. And, for me, hearing, I've actually asked women about body counts and, and I've asked them, different times, and I found out that their counts were off. But the minute I started hearing that is when I really started getting more and more less attracted to them, more and more turned off.
Right.
And, again, for me, I gotta know, I mean, even before I'm even really turned on that much sexually about, by you, I gotta know that you are about Team James, that you are in my corner. And if I don't feel that way, it doesn't happen. It really doesn't. So and I definitely have a lot more studying to do. I knew some of the effects of sexual relationship with women, but now I'm beginning to understand more and more. And thanks to you guys, I appreciate that.
No doubt. Much obliged, brother. Aziz, real quick, brother, what'd you get from the show? As we're about to sign off, and then we're gonna have Awesome Dre drop in for a few minutes. What'd you get from the show, brother? Real quick.
Yeah, man, I received a lot. A lot of it I'm gonna digest. I'm gonna have to go over it again. You might have to chop it up in pieces. But
I am. I got so much content.
Heavy.
Yeah, very heavy. Ted did an awesome job. Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, but in simplicity, it's one of the major things that I kind of like that concluded in my mind is that there was a time when men, it was understood that men were men and how men functioned, and men never had to prove their manhood to a woman by saying, "I'm not going to cheat. I'm gonna be faithful. I'm gonna be loyal to you." There was a time where where women were always the ones seeking a man's validation. And today, because of a lot of men thinking that, beauty is equivalent to innocence and a good girl, etc., that they're not believing that the women can cheat on them. They don't believe that the women can. And if they can accept the reality that, hey, I already know what you're capable of doing. And then a woman then says, I want to prove that I'm not a cheater, that I'm not a person that want to divorce, that I'm not a person that wants to run away. By men living in reality, I think that they can get more women to try to seek their validation instead of them being the same sort of white knights trying to prove that they're a good man.
Right. Well said.
Yes.
Yep. Well said, man.
No doubt. Awesome, Dre. I always like to add to the conversation, brother.
Did he drop out?
Hold tight.
He fell off.
Yeah, go ahead, Dre. How you doing, sir? I always like to add to the conversation, brother.
Yes, shout out to you, black men. It's always a beautiful opportunity to be here with black men. I'll say this, and you brothers are a lot more intellectual than I, so I'm just going to have to get to the core of the matter. The truth of the matter is, in my humble opinion, is black women don't respect black men. There's a level of contempt and loathing that seems to be right underneath the surface, and truth be told, and it's always ever present. And my opinion is just like the United States government, black men should be of this mentality. We do not negotiate with terrorists, and that's what I have to add to this conversation.
You bring Awesome Dre. You bring a great point, and the reason they resent men is because they're willing to drop their standards and be less of a man to accommodate a woman, so the less masculine you are, the more she resents you. When I brought that woman on the show who was a sex worker and a virgin, she said she would marry a beta male, but she would resent him for her rest of her life because she always knew he would be weak. So women, if you really sit down and talk to a woman, she will tell you she resents a man who doesn't stand up to her. But the problem is too many of these women have been way too promiscuous and they're emotionally unstable. They think it's normal and they can't see that a man has a right to say that's unacceptable behavior and I won't tolerate that. And I don't know if you were on earlier because I lived in Latin America, and those women, they may not be as promiscuous, but they may have experienced some sexual trauma when they were younger, but they still don't have that rage and anger like you see from Black women. And Black men find that acceptable. So as long as you accept that poor behavior, they're going to resent you for accepting it.
Right. I totally agree. That makes a lot of sense. It's contraindicated, but that makes a lot of sense because I've always said, Ted, that she only respects power and strength.
Exactly.
And so you're right. I totally agree with that. Well, listen, guys, we're going to sign off. And Yaziz, I'm going to chop this show up. I got to get some more software. These shows are time consuming. It takes a lot of work. This show was literally a 6-hour show for me to get it together for you guys today. Put a lot of time in these shows, man. And thank you, Awesome Dre, Yaziz, and James Turner.
Good
the
job,
ones that appreciate everything I do. Yeah, I
appreciate
it.
May I just add this, Kosher? May I just add this briefly, quickly? It really bothers me that more Black men are not tuning in. It really does. This stuff is priceless, and it's just it really bothers me. So I would like you to give.
He popped off.
No, I understand what he's saying. I pass it out to a lot of people tonight because this show right here is very powerful. You know, just as a sounding board to the brothers, very powerful. The information from you and Ted is heavy, and it's like it's one to digest. This is one for your mind right here.
Right. This is one for the books. Go ahead, Dre. Go ahead, brother.
Yes, I just want to say I tend to internalize things because these issues are very personal to me because I've suffered so much, and it, you know, for a Black man who's an independent thinker, it truly bothers me, and I just would like you to give me something that can help me be a little bit more tolerant because my patience is very, very limited because these issues are so serious. So to that you say what?
Well, I'll say this, brother. You know, like they said to the prophet Nehemiah, stay on the wall. You know, YouTube is about selling salaciousness. And many times the things that bring substantive value to your life, they don't more or less blow that out of proportion. You know, it's drama and goofy stuff that sells on YouTube. So it's nothing I can do about it. It's nothing you can do about it. The only thing I can say is share the content with people that think like you. Don't worry about the folks that don't think like you. We're growing an army of intellectual soldiers. Hopefully at some point, you know, we'll have streams where it'll be normal to have 200 people on the stream. But I appreciate the support from you, Aziz, Ted Santos. Go check out Ted on his channel, Ted Santos, and also Awesome Dre. And like I said, man, you know, it's a slow movement, man, but we're growing slowly. Thank you, Sir Hill Speak. Thank you, brother, for the $20 super sticker. Thank you, Sir Hill Speak. If you would like to pop on for a minute, Sir Hill, feel free to pop on for 1 minute, Sir Hill Speak. If not, I'm going to sign off. But if you want to pop on for a minute or two, Sir Hill, please come on. At some point, we must do a show together as well. You're a good brother, and you're a Gen Xer like myself. And it's always good to have these cogent and very timely conversations. Well, Ted, there's been another one for the book, brother. There has been another one for the book. I am going to have to and chop this show up because you dropped a lot of intellectual gems in this show. Go ahead, brother.
I think he was asking what can he do. It sounds like he didn't use the word trigger, but some of these relationship issues with Black women can be a trigger. From a mental health perspective, the direction I suggest Black men to look is in this direction of self-mastery, because when you have mastery over self, it's very difficult for things on the outside to trigger and affect you. But you have to do the work to do that. I mean, that's your profession. That's my profession. So if men start thinking in terms of mastery of self, it will support them in making better decisions and who they allow in their life and how they navigate life, but more important, how they react to things or things that they used to react to that no longer triggers them, which now gives you this power over your own life as opposed to being affected by bad behavior of others. So in other words, you carry your peace in the middle of a tornado.
Well, right. And that's one of the things I talked about a day or two ago when I talked about fortifying your inner sanctum. Your inner sanctum is that part of masculinity that's tied to the Levites. If you get a chance to check that show out, that was a powerful show. I almost did like an almost 2-hour monologue by myself. And I'm going to go back at that show and chop up some point. I got so many shows, man. I need to I got enough content where I could probably take off a whole year. I don't have to do any more content because I got so many gems I need to go and dissect. But I got to find the time to edit because doing this editing, man, takes a lot of time. These shows are extremely time consuming, brother. Very time consuming, and can be very draining too because I'm a therapist by trade, and I got to do. Tomorrow I'm just going to relax, man, and do a lot of self care because I got to take care of my health, man. But like I said, yeah, check out that show on yesterday talking about the inner sanctum of masculinity, and that more or less talks about similar to what you're talking about, and how we can move forward. So Ted, this has been one for the books, man. We will do this again. You always add intellectual clarity, guys. Go check out Ted Santos. He's a good brother, and we're about to sign off. And Ted, once again, man, thank you for everything. All right.
Hey, my pleasure. And just for the record, I'm not an elder yet. So
right. They want to put me in the elder. Man, my swag is too nice to be an elder, man. I told you guys that there are 7 steps that a man must go through in order to become an optimized male, and understanding female psychology is paramount, guys, to the functioning of a man. Ted Santos and I tonight had a great show talking about does promiscuity impact wife readiness? And I think with a resounding answer to that, it would be yes, that sexual promiscuity and also sexual addictions play a very deleterious role when it comes down to a man more or less getting the best outcomes in relationships and also for his future wife, but also for his future mental sustainability. So guys, this has been another good show. We're about to sign off. I'm going to enjoy some football tomorrow. I'm going to relax because I enjoy doing these shows, but these shows are time consuming. And they can be very draining. But because I love you guys, I bring you the clarity that's necessary to help you become better versions of yourselves. Be well.
4 in the morning, you got me up all cause you need to talk. To 4 in the evening, wanna break up, say that you've had enough. I'm tired of talking, again and again, argue about everything. You are my darling, let's kiss and make up, I know you wanna touch. You call me every night, call me every day, I just wanna get you alone now. Trust me when I say
Who told you that you couldn't rise from the morass of your current situation? Who told you that you had to be a slave to the pain of your past? Who told you that you had to settle for mediocrity in this current culture called America? Who told you that you couldn't change your mind? Talk to me. Now's the time for empowerment. And I'm not the Reverend Knight. I'm the Kosher Clinician.
addicted to you. All of my attention I've been giving to you. Caught up in my feelings, I got feelings for you. Caught up in my feelings, I got feelings for you. On my mind, I can't lie. On my mind, I can't lie. Pull you down till you dry. Pull you down till you dry. All the time, ease my mind. All the time, ease my mind. I know that you're dangerous, I'm addicted to you. I might rent the Lambo and go drive it like it's stolen. I've been living wild, I'm just going through the motions. Stumbling out the Uber, grab my hand, gave me the notion. Swimming in your water, but it feels just like the ocean. I can't lie, I've really been addicted to you. All of my attention I've been giving to you. Caught up in my feelings, I got feelings for you. Caught up in my feelings, I got feelings for you. On my mind, I can't lie.